You're a very obedient group. You're already come to order. That's amazing. I would like to call to order the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority and Redevelopment Agency meeting of May 16th, 2011. I'd ask that everyone in the room turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate, and ask our clerk to call roll, please.
Councilmember Stephen Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Rice.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Joe Brzezinski.
Here. As is our tradition, we have the opportunity to invite a member of our Young Leaders organization in our community to be with us tonight and to offer us the Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight we are honored to have Shane Dowdy with his family. A word about Shane. Shane is a second grader at Blossom Hill Elementary. He's a member of the Blossom Hill Safe Route to Schools Committee. He's a member of the Air Quality Testing Team at Blossom Hill School. Every Monday morning at school, he scans students to help collect data for school surveys on how kids get to school. He surveyed his neighborhood to help ensure safety and rule following. He's involved with the YMA Father-Son group, where they participated in several fundraisers. He's played Little League, Los Gatos Little League for 4 years, 2 years of basketball at Calvary, 3 seasons of flag football, and has recently begun Pop Warner football. He started karate at 3.5, and was a red black belt by age 8. He's been dirt bike riding for the last 5 years. And currently, Shane, along with 7 other students at Blossom Hill, is making a safety video for the PTA in school. That's all before noon. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask Shane to come forward now and lead us in the pledge. And would you all stand, please? There you go, Shane.
Please stand. Please put your right hand over your heart. Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated.
Thank you, Shane. Shane. I have a little gift for you. And one more time, let's hear it for Shane. Excellent. I'm going to now offer some proclamations from the podium, and if you'd give me a couple of seconds, we'll get down there. Tonight we have 2 presentations. The first is the National Public Works Week presentation, and I'd like to ask Todd Capurso, our Director of Parks and Public Works, to come forward to receive on the part of the town. And I would like to read this to you. Whereas National Public Works Week was instituted as a public education campaign by the American Public Works Association in 1960 and calls attention to the importance of public works in community life. And whereas public works services provided in Los Gatos are an integral part of our citizens' everyday lives, and the health and safety and comfort of Los Gatos greatly depends on those facilities and services. And whereas the quality and condition of these facilities, as well as their planning, design, and construction, is virtually dependent upon the efforts and skills of the public works employees. And whereas the efficiency of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff our Public Works Department is supported by the people's attitude and understanding of the importance of the work that they perform. And whereas this year's theme is Public Works Serving You and Our Community, as we celebrate the hard work and dedication of the many public works professionals throughout the world and in our community. And whereas, and this is our last whereas, and whereas the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos urges its citizens to join communities throughout the state and the nation in recognizing the substantial contributions that public works professionals make to the communities they serve. Now, therefore, it is resolved, I, Joe Przinski, by virtue of the authority vested in me as the mayor of the Town of Los Gatos, do deem it appropriate and do hereby proclaim May 15th through 21st, 2011, National Public Works Week within the Town of Los Gatos, and call upon all citizens, civic leaders, and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and recognize the contributions with which public works professionals make every day to ensure our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. Proclaim the 16th day of May, 2011 in the Town of Los Gatos, County of Santa Clara, State of California. Todd.
Thank you, Mayor Przinski. This really is the most wonderful time of the year, isn't it? We're very happy in the Parks and Public Works Department to accept this proclamation. Just want to capitalize a little bit on Public Works serving you and your community. We have a wonderful department that takes care of the more than 100 miles of street, the 20,000 street trees, 14 parks, Los Gatos Creek Trail, the Civic Center, soon the new library. And I want you all to know that you have a wonderful and very dedicated staff, not just here in town, but also with our contractual providers and through our partnerships with other agencies such as West Valley Sanitation and West Valley Clean Water. So again, I thank the mayor and council for their recognition, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Well deserved.
Now for something completely different. This is the Government Finance Officers Association. Not yet. All right. Thank you. This is the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for fiscal year 2010-2011. We're going to this year offer it to Steve Conway, our finance director. He's going to receive on behalf of the town. To receive the award, the town budget must be rated as proficient in 4 categories designed to assess how well the budget serves as a policy document, a financial plan, and an operations guide, and a commemorative guide. And this is actually the 14th year in a row that we've received this. And this is the distinguished award. And now I'd like to ask Steve Conway to come forward.
Thank you, Mayor, and I spared everyone in finance. We spared you the whereases, so I just want to thank the mayor and the council for all the support. Tonight we'll have our budget hearing, and we think we have another award-winning budget we hope to win next year on the budget that we're submitting on behalf of the community. And I want to also thank the hardworking staff, because it isn't just in the budget is a document that is prepared throughout the organization. It's compiled and we can coordinate it in finance, but it's a manager's budget and a community budget that flows organically through all the services that we provide the public. So thank you. And I'm always glad every year, so tickled that so many people come out. I could be National Public Parks Week that brought them, but I always say thank you because to recognize all the finance hard work, and you're all here, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thanks. That's called "and duties as assigned." All right, our next item is the closed session report. I ask our attorney if she would report on tonight's session.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. The council met as duly noticed in closed session before this evening's public matters, and regarding labor negotiations. They took no action, and there's nothing to report out this evening.
Thank you very much. Next item is council and town manager matters. I'd ask the council first. Anything that a council member would like to report to us at this time? Seeing none, Mr. Manager?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, 3 brief items to report, all occurring this week. Following on the National Public Works recognition, we have our annual Public Works and Parks and Public Works Yard Open House this Wednesday morning, the 18th, from 9 a.m. to, where did it go? To noon, 9 a.m. to noon, where students from elementary schools in Los Gatos and the surrounding area will be visiting our Public Works Yard to see the services that are provided for streets, sewer, parks, and the like in this community. That evening at Calvary Church at 6 p.m., we have our next community workshop on the North 40 Specific Plan, which will include visualization exercises for various types of building and development that could occur in the North 40, subject to further council review and action. And last, on Friday night, our library is hosting yet again here in the council chambers with the Friends of the Library, our Friday forum. And this week, it's on happiness expert Chuck Bradley. What happy people know. So it seems all the more appropriate for this budget season. That concludes staff report, and I'd now like to turn it over for tonight's Did You Know, which will be presented by Budget Director and Assistant Finance Director Jenny Hariyama.
Thank you, Town Manager. Good evening, Mayor and member of the Council. Did you know that the town receives $31 million in general fund revenue that supports town programs and services? As you can see by the chart above, the town has several economically sensitive revenues, but more importantly, property and sales tax account for more than half of the town's revenue. That's 56%. So where do your tax dollars go? For every property tax dollar spent, the town receives 9.5 cents. And for every dollar spent in sales tax, the town only receives 1 penny. We'll talk more in detail later this evening as we discuss the proposed budget, but for more information, you can contact the town at www.losgatosca.gov, or you can contact Jenny Hariyama, yours truly, Assistant Budget Finance Director, at the contact information below. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hariyama. Very good. And does that conclude the manager's report? Moving on then to the consent items. This series of items is able to be acted on in a single motion. The intent would be that if there's anyone in the audience or on council who would like to pull an item for further discussion before we go to adopting the consent item, would anyone indicate that at this time? Councilmember Leonardis.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull item number 3.
All right, item number 3 will be pulled from consent, and we will hear that immediately after verbal communications as the first item under other business, right? Any other items need to be sent? Yeah, need to be pulled, yes.
Mayor, I don't necessarily need to pull it, but I needed a clarification on item number 9. May I do that at
Please.
this time? This is a resolution stating the town's position regarding redistricting by both the county and the state. In the staff report, it references both of those efforts, but then when it gets to the action and the resolution, it only addresses it to the state. So I'm assuming that our position will be stated to both the county and the state, or just to the state?
Could I ask the manager to respond to that?
We'll certainly follow council direction. This is an issue being brought forward to the council from the West Valley mayors and managers. The proposal that came forward was to apply to both county and state redistricting. Other jurisdictions thought it was more appropriate to be limited to the state. We'll follow the council's direction on that issue.
Then would you like to proceed with the recommendation?
Is that appropriate now, or does it actually need to be pulled for that kind of discussion?
Well, in this case, then let's go ahead and we'll pull the item, and we'll hear that after item 3 then. So we're pulling 3 and 9. Any other items need to be pulled? Any member of the audience wish to pull an item from consent? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
I'll move approval of the consent calendar exclusive of items 3 and 9.
Okay, that's been moved to approve the consent less items 3 and 9. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Discussion, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, then we will hear items 3 and 9 in that order of once we've gotten past verbal communication. And we do have a couple of individuals who would like to speak during verbal communication. Again, this is a time in our agenda when anyone in our public may speak to an item for 3 minutes that's not on the agenda tonight. So the first individual who is requesting opportunity to speak is Ms. Kim Fern. She is the coordinator, director for 211 Santa Clara County Outreach. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Przinski and Town of Los Gatos City Town Council. Thank you for this opportunity tonight to talk with you about 211 Santa Clara County. My purpose tonight is to do outreach, to let the public know about what 211 is. So I have a question to the audience tonight. How many of you, by raising your hands, have heard of 211? Raise your hand. So it's a perfect opportunity to do outreach. 211 is a free 3-digit phone number you can call anytime, day or night, 24 hours a day, and talk to a live person when you don't know where to go. If you have someone who needs child care, adult day services, housing, utilities, or food, they can call 211 free from any phone. And it is during these difficult times that a lot of people, the first time they've never asked, it's the first time they're asking for help, and 211 is confidential. We don't ask your name or your phone number or anything like that. So when you call 211, you'll get a variety of different phone numbers and information so that you know where you can go to get some help to help yourself. In the 211 database, we have 930 agencies and 6,000 services. And there are 26 agencies headquartered in Los Gatos. And in 2010, the calendar year, there was 181 calls from Los Gatos residents in that calendar year. And the top reasons people called were for housing, utilities, legal, consumer, and public safety, and food and meals. And some of the agencies that received referrals from 211 were Charities Housing, Jewish Family Services of Silicon Valley, Addison Penzick Jewish Community Center, West Valley Community Services, and South Bay Teen Challenge, just to name a few. And in your packet you received tonight, there's a breakdown of the calls for the calendar year, as well as on the other side there are the agencies and the number of referrals that they've received from 211. So also, not only during times of daily need, 211 is a place to go for times of disaster. We have a seat at the County Office of Emergency Services. So, for example, in 2008, during the Los Gatos Summit fires, 211 was able to provide information on where to bring large animals, what roads were closed, what schools were closed, and where to go during the recovery process. So during times of need as well as during disaster. So now you've heard about 211, and if you know anyone in need, please don't hesitate to get a brochure or to let them know to go to our website, 211scc.org. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Firm. Any questions? I'd just like to make a comment. We are focusing this year on disaster preparedness in our community, and at last week's Santa Clara County Cities Association board meeting, Ms. Firm made a presentation and worked through all of the different opportunities we would have in an emergency to access information that might be of a non-emergency nature. We know from our experience with Loma Prieta in particular how the 911 system could get overwhelmed with emergency calls. And yet, when we're out there in the community, pretty much on our own, it's really essential that we continue to get the information necessary to make us safe, make our families safe. And that's where 211 comes in. So I'd like everyone in the community tonight to kind of make sure you remember this number, 211, because this is the backup to the 911 system. And this would be where you'd go to find out what roads are open, what roads are closed, where the evacuation centers are, how to get the kind of necessary supplies that you might need in this particular emergency, and not have to go through the 911 system, because we know that the professional emergency service personnel are going to be totally tied up, and this is again part of our being self-reliant in the case of emergency. So I want to thank you again, Ms. Firm, for bringing this to our attention, and we'll keep reminding ourselves of the things we need to do to make ourselves a safe community in a major emergency and a disaster that we know is coming. So thanks one more time.
And thank you, and we certainly appreciate the town of Los Gatos investment in 211 as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, our next speaker in verbal communications is Bob Rao, and he's going to speak in relationship to his connection with Campo de Bachi.
Good evening, Mayor Brzezinski and Town Council. I'm here on behalf of Campo de Bachi to make an announcement. The 2011 U.S. National Bocce Championships are going to be held at Campo de Bachi. This is a big deal for us at Campo de Bachi, and it's a big deal for the town of Los Gatos. Being that June 27th and 28th are the days when we'll be holding our A and B Open, which is the open game that everybody's familiar with. Teams from throughout the United States will be here in Los Gatos to compete. And we would hope that the mayor and the council, especially the mayor, might be there the morning of the 27th, which is a Monday, to welcome these players to Los Gatos. They're coming here. They don't know much about Los Gatos, and we're trying to fill them in the meantime. Just as a matter of course, you might like to know that bocce itself is the third most popular sport in the world, next to golf and soccer. There are 25 million participants in bocce throughout the United States alone, and those 25 million, I would hope, will be watching our live stream from Campo de Bachi in Los Gatos. In the bocce world, this is the epitome of the game, and we'd like you to come out and watch the 27th and 28th. And we'll have celebrities like Tony Bruno will be there, Steve Mariucci, of course, not John Madden this time. We'll keep him for the Madden Mariucci tournament. But again, June 27th and 28th, we'll be hosting the U.S. National Bocce Championships here, and we would hope that you will all come. Thank you.
Thank you, and I indeed have it on my calendar. It's an 8 o'clock start. I'm supposed to...
8 o'clock is when you'd be on.
You got it. Super.
Okay,
Thanks very much. All right, is there anyone else who'd like to speak during verbal communications? Seeing none, then we are going to go to our next item, which is we're going to see item number 3 at this point in time. This is to adopt a resolution approving a request to allow full alcohol beverage service and to modify hours of operation for an existing restaurant, Gardino's, and denying a request to expand the existing restaurant, Gardino's, to add seating on property zone C2, and this is part of a conditional use application. I'd ask that our attorney be available to give us information regarding the possibility of a reconsideration, if she would, but I also know that Councilwoman Spector is probably going to recuse, and if she wouldn't mind explaining.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to recuse myself for the reasons stated the last time this matter was before us. Thank you.
All right. All right, Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. As you recall, this matter came before the Council on May 2nd, 2011, and there was a proposed resolution, as you stated, to approve the request to allow full alcohol beverage service and modify the hours of operation. And Council asked this matter return for a approval of the resolution. In the meantime, you've asked to be briefed on the Council's policy regarding any motions for reconsideration. Quite some time ago in 1986, the Town Council adopted a policy regarding agenda format and rules, and most recently updated that in last December of 2010. And basically, the Council policy provides a policy on motions for reconsideration that requires that reconsideration of prior council actions is discouraged and may only be occur in special circumstances subject to the procedural restrictions outlined in that memo. Basically, the policy requires a motion to be made by a council member who previously voted on the prevailing side of the prior action. And on the meeting of May 2nd, there were 3. That would be Councilmember Leonardis, Councilmember McNutt, and Vice Mayor Rice. The maker of this motion for reconsideration shall specifically articulate new information, analysis, and/or circumstances that warrant reconsideration of the prior action. The motion must be adopted by a majority of the full council, and the only opportunity for a council member to make a motion for reconsideration is this evening.
Thank you very much. So the item has been pulled by Councilmember Leonardis. Councilmember Leonardis, would you like to make a motion?
I'd like to know if at this time there would be anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this.
All right. Delaying any motion, then we do have 2 speaker cards for members of our public who might want to speak. The first is Peter Carter. And Mr. Carter, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Brzezinski. My name is Peter Carter. I've been a resident of Los Gatos for 54 years, most of it at 45 Broadway, in the historic area adjacent to our downtown. I'm appearing before you this evening as a longtime friend of Gardino's owner, Pete Gillo, to respectfully request that you reconsider your decision regarding the expansion of Gardino's restaurant based on new information. Understanding your reluctance to take any action that permanently reduces our town's stock of leasable retail space, Gardino's has taken the unprecedented step of requesting a conditional use permit that will guarantee that their expansion space never be available as a standalone restaurant. Rather, it will only provide additional seating space in their adjacent existing restaurant. This has never been done before. There'll be no kitchen or food prepared in the expansion area ever. The existing kitchen in the present restaurant can never be moved, thus allowing the new space to easily be reverted to retail in the future. Gardino's owners would even be willing to enter into an operational agreement, as you've done with other downtown businesses, to ensure this space is not improved with a kitchen or food preparation facilities. A second reason for reconsidering this application is that Gardino's continued viability depends on this additional space. It has become evident in today's market conditions, which include continued rent increases, that Gardino's will not be able to maintain its viability without this additional seating. Being able to serve cocktails would help, but use of existing space for liquor display and preparation in their small restaurant would further erode their scarce and critically important table space. With their very survival at stake, it's frightening to think of a situation where Gardino's is forced to close in a year when their existing lease expires, and shortly thereafter a Subway sandwich or a Poco Loco or even a Hooters announce that they plan to move in. All they would need is a business license. These restaurants are not classified as fast food, but rather they are high turnover sit-down and need no discretionary town approval. It's important that the retail aspect of downtown is preserved. It's also important that existing businesses, which have for decades served our town's citizens, employed local residents, and been owned and operated by local families, should receive certain considerations, especially those that give back so much to our town. It's critical that these locally owned restaurants be protected and allowed to evolve in a way that adds vitality to our downtown. As more and more national formula retail outlets seek to open in Los Gatos.
Peter? We've run out of time.
I'm what?
And we've run out of time, if you wouldn't mind.
I have about 3 sentences. Could I finish?
That's okay. No, I think we're going to stop there. We hear what you have to say, and we appreciate it. Okay, but for consistency's sake, we have to call it there. Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Okay.
The next presenter is Jonathan Knowles.
Good evening, your Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. I'll pick up where Mr. Carter left off. My name is Jonathan Knowles, and I haven't lived in Los Gatos for 54 years. I haven't even been alive for 54 years, but I love this town. I think you all know how much I love this town and try to give to this town because I love it so much. I know you do too, and I really sincerely appreciate the things that you guys do for us, and thus have worked hard to support your efforts in doing that, and appreciate that you take the time to look into these issues. Very specifically with regards to Gardino's, as Mr. Carter mentioned, they have been here for decades. I can tell you as a person who is in a leadership position with our police foundation, Music in the Park, Jazz on the Plaza, our new library, there are very few. I'd say that Gardino's is one of the 2 most generous organization or local businesses and when it comes to serving the community. And it does worry me a bit to think that they might not be able to make it down the road. I don't know if you all know this or not, but even our own Terry Hope, who has had her business, she's now in her 30th year with the Los Gatos Coffee Roasting Company, also one of the most generous business owners here in town, and also with her time being involved in the things she is, she's downsizing. She's in the 3 spots now, and she's moving down to 2. Rents are going up. They're going up all over town. And our small business owners are having some issues with that. Some of them are leaving. Look at the ones that have just announced in the last few months that they're not going to be able to do business in town anymore. As Mr. Carter mentioned, it just seems such a shame to lose one of the businesses, potentially lose. And I understand that businesses probably come to you all the time and say, I won't be able to survive if you don't let me do this thing. But the reality is times are tough, and we know our rents downtown are pretty expensive and likely to continue going up. Overhead, and not just rents, let me not put it on just the landlords here, but overhead in general is, and this is a big issue for us. So I do hope that one of you makes a motion to reconsider, and I'll say it now, I hope you do reconsider and allow them to do this. It seems to be to me as a member of the community that this request is more than reasonable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Yes, Councilwoman McNutt.
May I ask Mr. Knowles a question?
Yes, please, Jonathan.
Sorry, I know better than to leave before I ask you if you do.
I dismissed you. That's okay.
Mr. Knowles, this a suggestion for reconsideration is a different kind of matter than when the application comes before us, and there must be a specific new information to justify that kind of request. So you made a passionate plea on behalf of Gardino's, but I didn't really hear any new information. Is there anything else beyond what Mr. Carter said that in your mind justifies this extraordinary action?
No, but if I can, I'll reiterate the notion that if the objection was that the way it was presented before was the concern over permanently moving something into restaurant space that cannot be moved back to retail, as Economic Times indicates, a CUP that guarantees that was not, as in my understanding, part of the original ask, part of the original plan for this, and thus I believe that's the new information that I'm hoping is enough new information to do that. And that's the new information from the business owner. I guess you had the new information before what was going on with other businesses in town. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you all, council members.
All right. Again, one more time, anyone in our audience wish to speak on this matter, then we will move on. Councilmember Leonardis.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask Mr. Carter a couple questions? I just wanted him to repeat a couple of the things that he said earlier on.
Mr. Leonardis, is there the necessity of repeating them for purposes of making the motion?
That's where I would like to go, yes.
Mr. Carter? And if we can make this brief and succinct.
Okay. Mr. Carter, you mentioned that the CUP would be written in such a way that was unprecedented that the space would never be available as a standalone restaurant. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Now, according to what we have to do for reconsideration, a member of council who was not in the minority position must make the motion and must present at this time compelling arguments. Anyone can make the second. And then with given that we have 4 at the dais, Councilwoman Spector recused, for a motion for reconsideration to pass, it must pass with a majority. So is there anyone who wishes to make a motion to reconsider? Yes, Mr. Leonardis.
Well, based on the new information we've heard here this evening, I'd be willing to make a motion. I like the idea that Mr. Carter clarified when I asked him about this never being available as a standalone restaurant. I also have a concern that if for some reason that they would be willing to put in there that there would be no formula restaurant as well. So I guess this calls a question. I move to reconsider the application for Gardino's for the CUP modification in light of the new information we have tonight regarding that the CUP will state that it will never be available as a standalone restaurant, that it will revert back to retail space, and that there will be no formula restaurant space able to move in there if for some reason that first thing doesn't materialize, I guess.
All right, if I can have a clarification from staff on what's being proposed as stated, the practicality or possibility of a prohibition on a non-formula restaurant space, which I do not believe we have ever approached in previous times.
Our current formula ordinance does not apply to restaurants. It is an issue that staff will be reviewing as part of the formula review that we're doing at your prior direction over the next couple of months. I think the issues raised by Mr. Carter and included in the motion by Mr. Leonardis raise interesting policy and legal issues that would have to be explored before the matter is brought back to council. Specifically, I think any conditions on the property, since CUPs run with the property, would have to be part of an application by both the property owner and the business owner, so that it is a stipulation of both. The operating agreement that Mr. Carter mentioned is something we have used in limited cases on other properties, which might also provide additional restrictions and control. We, from a policy side, can't provide a definitive answer on how successful these tools will be until we've reviewed it in advance of the council's reconsideration, if you choose to do so. I'll defer to the attorney for any additional comments.
I have nothing further.
All right, thank you. All right, we have a motion to reconsider item 3, and the motion was predicated on what is considered new information by the motion maker. Is there a second? Yes, Vice Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I'll go ahead and second the motion. I think what I'm hearing from staff as well as what was in the motion, it certainly seems that there's information potentially out there that we have not heard before, which would be the definition of new information. And based on that, I will second it.
All right, so there's a motion and a second to reconsider. And if we do, then I'm going to ask the attorney to specify what are the next steps. So, unless there's further discussion? Yes, Madam McNutt.
I'm not sure there's further discussion. I think maybe it's another question of staff. So, Mr. Manager, what I think I heard you allude to is that this is not going to come, if this motion carries, it's not going to come back to us lickety-split, that there's going to have to be some work done by staff that's going to bring up some bigger policy issues And so it may take us 2 or 3 meetings, or maybe even after the summer break before it comes back to us.
I can't make that judgment on the fly. I think there is policy and legal work that would have to be reviewed. Some of these would be unprecedented conditions for our jurisdiction, and we need to make sure they're viable. We only have 2 meetings left prior to the July recess. Both of those are pretty full agendas. If it's a simple research project and we can find precedent in other jurisdictions, it's not inconceivable it could come as a late item on the 6th, but it could well take much longer.
And I would just like to point out, in terms of the policy related to this, if indeed this motion passes, then the second step is for the reconsideration is that a full reconsideration of this prior action would be placed on the next available council agenda. And so that would be the operative term, is next available. And I guess we could interpret that when we're discussing how we set agendas, Mr. Manager. Yes. Okay. Please.
Just for additional clarification, it's next available council agenda following the usual agenda setting and public notification process. Since the CUP is a land use matter, this will also require the minimum 10-day public hearing notice.
Thank you. And Councilwoman McNutt.
I reluctantly, in some ways, am going to be supporting this motion because I do not believe in reconsideration as a matter of course. I do consider it an extraordinary measure. There may or may not be new information here that is persuasive. We'll wait to see. But I'm really intrigued is not the right word. I'm concerned about the changes going on in downtown, and I'm concerned about the policy challenges that are ahead of us and ways that we may want to really be very thoughtful about this, not only in this particular case, but going forward. And so I think using this as a test case, which may make it a lot slower than what you want, but I think it's going to be very helpful and needed for us as we go forward, because who knows what's around the corner.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or discussion? Seeing none, then I will call the question. We do have a motion on the floor from Councilmember Leonardis, seconded by Vice Mayor Rice, to reconsider. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We will, the manager and I will meet regarding the timing on the agendizing of this issue, and we will get back to you. Thank you. That brings us to item number 9, and this was a request of Councilmember McNutt to review a document that is to be forwarded to various agencies regarding redistricting. And welcome back. And I would ask that the manager respond at this point.
Mr. Mayor, in light of the question asked by Council Member McNutt, I would interpret the resolution, unless directed otherwise by council upon its action, that the town council supports the West Valley communities being viewed as a community of interest in all redistricting, and that the mayor can communicate that as pursuant to the last be it resolved on the bottom of the page to both the county and the California Redistricting Commission. The one additional piece of information I'd add is in the one discussion that occurred on this previously at the West Valley mayors and managers, it is almost impossible to conceive of county districting that would have all of the West Valley communities in a single district, and that was part of the discussion we had. So there'll be most likely some separation, while I believe there was more hope that at the statewide legislative districts, the West Valley communities could be kept intact. So unless directed otherwise, we would interpret it as applying to both county and state redistricting unless directed otherwise by the county.
By the council.
By the council.
Councilwoman McNutt, does that satisfy your question, your answer, or your issue?
It would be my preference, and it would be the change that would be needed on this item to make me happy with it.
All right. Does any member of council wish to ask a clarifying question on this item? Seeing none, any member of our public wish to speak on item number 9? Seeing none, then is there a motion?
I'll move for approval of item number 9.
It's been moved and seconded. Councilwoman McNutt and is the motion maker, and Vice Mayor Rice is the seconder of the motion. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. That brings us then to our other business item, number 13. Item 13 is the Los Gatos Creekside Sports Park conceptual design. It's a review and to accept the staff report outlining the Creekside Sports Park project status and conceptual design. And just I would want to make one comment as a preface to the discussion. What we are doing with this item is reviewing what the staff has said and accepting the staff report to the project status and conceptual design. And the discussion can focus on which of the design options would be most appropriate. But there is an insertion of an attachment to the meeting of the Parks Commission that occurred on April 5th. There are a couple of motions contained therein. I'm going to take that as part of the review of the staff report, but the motions will not be inclusive in the discussion of the acceptance. That in the acceptance we're basically looking at which of the options is the intention of the council. Okay. With that, we do have a staff report, and Ms. Walter is presenting. Ms. Walter, is your microphone on?
I'm sorry, I thought it was. Thank you. The presentation tonight will focus on a synopsis of the community outreach process and master planning process thus far, and then wrap up with a more detailed discussion of the proposed concept that we've been moving through the environmental process thus far. I'll start with a quick background. In 2008, the town of Los Gatos sold 13 acres of land to the county for $6 million. The proceeds from that sale were placed into a reserve fund for a community and youth sports facility. In 2009, the town purchased 2.79 acres located at 930 University Avenue for use and development of such a facility. And in 2010, we began the master planning of this new facility with the adoption of town council guiding principles to be used as we move through this process. The guiding principles obviously are very detailed. I won't spend a lot of time going over them again, but I do want to hit a few highlights. One of the main principles presented was that the site would meet active and unmet needs as defined in the parks inventory that was published as a precursor to the general plan. Also that the facility have low maintenance and minimal environmental impacts, that we use artificial turf, that large-scale stadium lighting not be included, that we do demolish all of the existing buildings on the site, and that any new buildings would be modest in size, that we provide safe, convenient access to the facility, we explore shared parking, music and entertainment not allowed at the site, and we will look for cooperative investment opportunities, partnering agencies, and other ways to fund the development of the site. We had two main budget considerations that we used throughout the process. One was the construction budget itself. $3 million was used for the purchase of the property, which left us with $3 million to develop the site. We also used ongoing operations and maintenance considerations as we looked at the budget. So we wanted to make sure that whatever site we develop is something that we are able to maintain within the current town budget. This is our timeline, and it reflects the beginning of the master planning process, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail in just a moment. We started with a community meeting in November, had a second community meeting in December, And you'll see just below that, we have plans and specifications development and environmental review starting along the way as we put more information into our proposed plans. Community meeting number 3 was held in February, and our target at this point, provided we stay on track timeline-wise, is to bring the master plan to the Planning Commission in August and to Council in September, with a construction bid released in October and an award and construction groundbreaking to be scheduled in November. It's important to note that all of these pieces of the timeline are very tightly linked, and certainly any decisions that are made along the way can impact that timeline. I'd like to provide a brief summary of the community input that we gathered along the way. Meeting number 1 was for the purpose of gathering ideas around potential uses for the site. It was an input gathering session with approximately 70 people. The ideas included a multi-use sports field, full court basketball, small-scale tennis courts, a track and field, or a track around the perimeter of the field, and a skate park. The other items that were brought up during that meeting are areas for spectators to watch the activities, access to the trail, and safe access to the facility. The second meeting was a presentation of 2 concepts that were based on that first meeting's input, as well as the guiding principles and, again, the budget considerations. We also included a hands-on planning activity where we actually gave templates to the participants so that they could essentially try to fit elements onto the site and give us some additional input on what they would like to see. That meeting was attended by 35 people, and there were more youth present at that particular meeting who were interested in the addition of a skate facility. At meeting number 3, we presented 2 main concepts that again included the feedback from meetings number 1 and 2. And we also presented an evaluation of each of those concepts against the guiding principles. So we attempted to do a scorecard where we actually looked at how each of those concepts met all of the guiding principles. At the conclusion of that meeting, we did conduct an informal poll, and at that meeting, the majority of the folks in attendance were in support of the largest multi-use field possible. I'm going to quickly show you the concepts that were presented at that community meeting number 3, and then we'll give you a more updated concept as we move forward. Concept A, I'm going to show you 2 versions of this. The first is a U12 soccer field. You'll notice that there is some parking area provided, a drop-off zone, and a restroom facility that's located along the east side of the park. There's also a small picnic area and access to the trail noted. The very next concept A shows that same footprint of the field with use for lacrosse. Concept B shows a smaller field, a U10 field, very limited parking on site, drop-off zone, a perimeter around the field, and flexible hardscape options. There were 3 flexible hardscape options shown at the meeting. The first was a small skate park, approximately 7,000 square feet. The second was a full court basketball court. And the third was a small-scale tennis court. I mentioned the guiding principles scorecard. We took each of the principles and weighed them against, or each of the concepts, and weighed them against the guiding principles. Concept A completely met all of the guiding principles. Concept B completely met 6 of the principles and partially met 4 of the principles. The areas that it did not completely meet in were centered around cooperative opportunities for maintenance and operations of the facility. Since the time of that last community meeting, we have begun quite a bit of on-site work where we've looked at utility easements, the actual site grading, core samples, and we have discovered some additional information that has led us to some adjustments to that preferred concept. I'd like to go through a few of those in detail as best as I can from my seat here.
So the first thing to note is that we did change the parking area. The parking area previously had included 35 spaces. It included one row of single stall parking and a second row of double parking. This new layout actually allows us to park 2 rows of cars on both sides. This is important because in the process of going through our parking needs for the facility, our peak demand parking numbers from ITE came back at 59 spots for peak weekend time. Even with this site, we have 41 spots. So we're still shy our required parking for peak weekend time. We did talk about in the guiding principles needing to explore shared off-site parking, and we are in the process of doing that, but we certainly want to make sure we can get as much on-site parking as we can. The second major, let's see if I can, nope. Oh, am I doing it the wrong way? Yeah. Should have practiced that. No, that's still not. There we go. The second major item to note, and it's very difficult to see on here, is we have some utility easements and water lines located here and here, which are very faint on the drawing. And both of those restrict us from putting structures on those areas of the park. So we took our site, which was 2.79 acres. We have a field on there, and now we have more essentially unconstructable sites within that field due to the water lines and sewer lines that are running underneath. So that did require us to move the restroom facility from the east side of the park down to the south side, and in what was formerly just a picnic area. And it also requires us to maintain the pathway from the parking lot into that picnic area so that we can actually service the restroom as well as any snack shack that might go in that building. So that building right now is designated to be both a restroom facility on one side and then some sort of a snack shack on the other side. What that also did was create an opportunity for an entrance to the park in what would be the west center or the east center of the park, and a bridge location that was determined to be the least environmentally invasive. So we are still evaluating the option of including the pedestrian bridge in this site, and right now the location of that bridge looks to be right at the center of the park. That allows us, again, a minimal impact on trees and the riparian corridor, and as you enter the park, you would see the field and the spectator area. I'll move on to next steps in our process. The very next step that we have moving forward is to take this to DRC at the end of May. We have also begun the CEQA process. We've started the traffic studies, the parking studies, biologist studies. I want to reiterate that the site plan that we're moving forward, we have identified a bridge location, we've identified the location of major field components, and we're using that to base the environmental review process. The process began approximately 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we anticipate that concluding by the end of June with a 30-day posting between July and August. We would then take this to the Planning Commission in August, the first meeting in August, and to the first meeting for Town Council in September. Release the bid specifications from there pending Town Council approval, and selection and approval of a contractor in late October with a planned groundbreaking for November. And with that, I will take questions.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Walter. Questions of staff. Vice Mayor Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually have 2 questions of staff. First, what are the ramifications of having too little parking on site? Does that restrict us in any way for the development?
My understanding is that we're going to need to get special approval in the use permit process as is. So yes, it's the possibility exists that we would not get Planning Commission approval if we did not have adequate on-site parking.
Okay. The second thing is more of a budget question. Since we have X dollars to spend, doesn't mean we have to spend them all. I know the guiding principles state to demolish all the existing structures. Looking at the length of running utilities and that kind of thing, do we have any concept or idea of how much we could potentially save, or is there a savings, if we were to reuse some or remodel some of the existing building that is there to provide the restrooms and the concessions and storage and the like?
I'll answer, and then I'll ask for Todd or Kevin to add any additional information needed. My understanding is that in evaluating the current state of those buildings, that they're not in usable condition. I don't know that we've done a thorough budget evaluation of what it would take to get them to that condition, but the initial assessment was that it would be more financially viable to demolish them and put a prefabricated restroom facility on site.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, that would be my appraisal too, having visited the site and seen the condition of the buildings, and the location and the kinds of impacts they would have on just the use of the facility. I would agree with Ms. Walter and Mr. Capurso at that time too. Councilwoman Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And having visited the buildings, I agree with Mr. Capurso. Question of staff, clarification for me. What is the issue that will ultimately be going before the Planning Commission and then us? Is it, do you accept the use as depicted in Attachment 3, yes or no? Or is it what use or uses do you suggest or approve for the site? So it's still not clear to me how broad the discretion is for the decision makers, i.e. the Planning Commission and then the Town Council.
I believe
I'll let Todd take that one.
that I think Mr. Capurso is going to take that
I'm
one.
up here, but I'm also going to be I
Yeah.
have one eye on Wendy. There's actually several items being processed simultaneously. So if a park master plan just by itself were to move through the process, it would be a recommendation of the Parks Commission for what the elements are, and then approval of the council for essentially what you referred to, that depiction of the elements being provided. The Planning Commission's role is more to improve it from an environmental, basically from the CEQA perspective, to ensure that the environmental work that we've done is sufficient and that we've mitigated appropriately, or we have not, and what those concerns would be. The Planning Commission's role would not be so much a review of the elements, but a conformance with both environmental and then town planning and building regulations.
And Mr. Mayor, if I might add, the tangible action by both the CUP and the council at the end of the environmental review and planning process would be approval of a conditional use permit. And that would be the tangible action by the Planning Commission with the associated environmental review. That, of course, looks at mitigations, alternatives, and the like.
All right, Councilwoman Spector.
Thank you again, but it's still not clear to me. Is the issue that is going forward, do we accept the U2 field, U12 field as depicted in Attachment 3, or is the issue, because it was discussed at the Parks Commission, is the issue, do you want a large soccer field, do you want a little smaller soccer field and hardscape? It's not clear to me what is going forward from this point on.
The action at tonight's council meeting is in simple terms, we're here to give you a progress check, because we've essentially been running this process since last November, and other than a couple of check-ins along the way with the council subcommittee, haven't brought this project before council up until now. So this is really, we're not necessarily requesting an action above and beyond accepting accept the report and the progress that we've made to this point. However, we are also looking for council input and feedback. So this isn't the formal approval of the master plan that I referred to earlier. That's something that will come back in September. At this point, this is a progress check, and if you have additional feedback, questions, or direction for us, we're happy to take it tonight.
And if I might add, it's much like during the library design process, where we brought conceptual designs for the new library to you in repeated points in time, never asking for any final act, because it is inappropriate for the council to take any final action on a proposed design till after the environmental and planning review has been done. So this is a conceptual report, conceptual direction on where we're going. And in the environmental process, the best way to view it is without feedback to the alternative, the preferred concept coming to you from the Parks Commission and staff would be the preferred alternative in any environmental review. That would be the project description that is going in to the land use process, is what's before you, unless you request or direct otherwise.
All right, does that satisfy Councilwoman Spector? I believe it does. Other questions or comments for staff? Seeing none, I'd like to open it to our public. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Member Leonardis.
Thank you. Looking at the field, it shows dimensions of 180 by 300 feet. And when I did the calculation on that, I come up with 54,000 square feet. When I divide that by an acre, which is about 44,000 square feet, I come up with about 1.2 acres. So I'm understanding that the site is about 2.8 acres total. I'm trying to determine, looking at the drawing, where the other 1.6 acres is. Can you elaborate on that for me?
I can. The first thing to note is that there's an additional 10 feet minimum of runout space that's added to the perimeter of the field itself. There's also parking area included in that. So with the additional runout space, we have about 64,000 square feet. There's additional parking area included, which is about 21,000 square feet. And then the remainder of the space is distributed throughout the site, taking into consideration we have a pinch point at the north corner. We have utility easements, again, that we need to avoid and can't construct over, and the amount of space needed for pedestrian circulation, buffer between the field and the parking area, and any planting or other mitigation that needs to be done for stormwater mitigation.
One more question. Regarding the idea of multi-use sports field. I look at it, and oh, by the way, I must disclose that I've been coaching in the Los Gatos Soccer League for 4 seasons, among things, so I'm not biased. But looking at it, there was talk of soccer, lacrosse. At one point in time, football was mentioned. Are there going to be goal posts for a football field? What are we gearing towards here? I mean, to me, it looks mostly for soccer. Is that...
The field dimensions would be acceptable from what we've heard through the community process for soccer, lacrosse, and potentially for football. What the site ultimately gets programmed to be will be somewhat dependent upon the operational model, which will determine as we move further down through the process.
One more follow-up question.
Sure.
Being one of those parents that spent most of this past weekend sitting at a soccer complex, you know, looking at the concept B and the concept A, I'll just tell you where I was. It was called the Creekside Sports Complex, but it's in Cupertino. They actually have a Creekside Sports Complex. I'm sure some of the soccer people are familiar with that. One of the great things about it is they have, you know, a snack shack, bathrooms, 3 soccer fields, parking, a community room, but they also have a tot play area or a playground, a couple basketball hoops. And as a parent who sits and watches these soccer games and watches the fields that don't have these other amenities, the kids, the younger kids need a place to go, or even the players themselves after the game like to participate in getting on the swings and shooting hoops and doing some of those things. So I'm just looking at this design and looking at design B, it seemed more inclusive of the complete picture. I understand the importance of the concession and the restrooms, of course. I'm not so certain about the picnic area being as important as some of those other things. So just my thoughts on that.
Is that it? Any other comments? Yes, Councilwoman McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I have always assumed as a member of the subcommittee, as well as just a member of council that's talked about this in a lot of different ways, that we don't ultimately know all of the uses of this field because we're still in design and we still have to figure out who our partner is, our collaborators. But I could foresee a time, for example, and so what's important to me is maximum flexibility, because we don't have a whole lot of space. It would be wonderful if we had a great big soccer field that, just a soccer complex and just name every other sport and had it, but we don't have enough land. So, so having maximum flexibility, because I could foresee a time where if our partner organizations identify a time of day where, let's say it's soccer, participants are not available, like during school. And maybe you have the tiny tots out there, like they're over at Blossom Hill now, but maybe you also have seniors out there doing, what do you call it? Tai Chi, thank you. There's maybe other athletic recreation uses for that. So I really like calling it a multi-purpose field and not getting locked into any one particular sport, because I do think we need to be flexible as we go forward and just see how it plays out. And Mayor, do you need a motion on acceptance of
I think we're going to, but I want to continue discussion for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
My own attitude as the other member of the committee, subcommittee, is that I absolutely feel that we are driven to serve the maximum of organized sports that are deficient in the community. And everything that I've seen and everything I've heard says it's the soccer community that has the greatest need, that there are tot lots, various places in every one of our parks. And there are opportunities for tennis, opportunities for basketball. Those aren't sports that are crying out for facilities. Now, maybe there'll be some people who are closer in proximity to this facility, but this facility, I think, needs to be dedicated to that purpose that we initiated our discussion with, and that was the whole issue of the lack of soccer, or real soccer facilities. And it is the sport that draws the largest number of young people in our community. It is the sport that has the highest inflow of new athletes, as far as I can tell. I walked my dog in Blossom Hill Park. It was a great day. I think it was on Saturday. Unbelievable. There had to be like every kid who was no taller than 2 feet out there running around playing soccer. And the idea to me is that we decided, we dedicated ourselves to provide this facility. I appreciate the fact that there are a lot of other needs, but they're not as great as this particular need. I would hate to see us diminish the size of the field to such a degree that then it actually doesn't provide the utility that we're looking for here. And from my perspective as a member of the ad hoc committee, I have no question that I want flexibility, but that flexibility to me should be driven by the types of sports that are going to use that field. And in non-soccer times, definitely the various other uses should be available to members of the community, including all those little 2 feet tall kids who are going to come out and get a chance to practice their soccer when the big kids the 4 feet tall kids aren't around. So with that in mind, I'm very, very hesitant to start to look for alternative uses when we do have alternative uses already available in other places in the community. Other comments? Councilmember Leonardis, you wanted to say something?
I agree with what you said. I think it's important to get the largest field possible out of this. I mean, we paid quite a bit of money for it, and it was the intention to serve the soccer community for the most part. I also think of it in terms of a public park, and this past weekend I was also at John Morgan Park, and they had 7 soccer games going on there simultaneously and not much parking. But it's one of those things where, are we making the best use of the space that we have? We paid quite a bit of money for it. Why does it have to be an either or? Can we still get a U12 playing field? And can we get a multi-use sports court that would perhaps, include basketball as well as a mini soccer game, as well as, roller hockey or something like that, somewhere in the parking lot area, and an area for the tots to play. Are we making the most of it? That's my biggest point.
Any other comments? Do we have anyone in the public who would like to speak to this issue? That was rhetorical. I saw the card come up. Randy Chen wants to speak.
Randy Chen, Los Gatos.
Randy, will you speak into the mic?
Los Gatos United Soccer. Just to put Councilmember McNutt and Mr. Leonardis at ease, during the day, and we work very closely with the rec department and Todd Badger, and of course they would use it from whenever, 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. They would have full use to use it for whatever they wanted, whether it was soccer classes or seniors doing Tai Chi or whatever they decided they could use it with. We wouldn't be using it at those times, and they're looking forward to having this field as much as we are. So.
All right. Any questions? Thank you, Ms. Chen. I believe we have another card coming. We go by the book here. The next presenter is Ed San Juan.
Good evening, Mayor, Town Council, esteemed town staff. I would just like to say that we support, of course, we support this beautiful new project that's being developed, and the league is willing to contribute and step up to the plate like we've promised. And I just want to reiterate it one more time. We're willing to put up $100K of our hard-earned money and hard-saved money, and to support it monthly, annually, whatever you need, whatever you require, we will do. The people right here are the next generation of our President Walt here, our future President Stephen. 5 children. The youngest one, I think, they're both 5, and so there's going to be a lot of young soccer players coming through these fellows right here, and also Mark and Joe as well, and they're stepping up to the plate, and they're here before you tonight to show support for the project. And whatever you need from us, we're here for you, and we'll be here for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There is a question?
Thank you, Mr. San Juan. I want to make sure I understand field sizes. My boys played a number of years ago, and they didn't play beyond age 10 or so. This is a U12, potentially, a U12 field at 300 feet, 100 yards long. How much bigger do fields get?
Well,
what's an adult soccer field in length?
That is an average minimal size. That's a size you'd use for an adult team, 11v11s. And you can go from anywhere from U12 all the way up to U21s on that size field. Larger is always better, 10 yards in either direction. lengthen. You know, at Fisher, it's 120 by 95 on one, 120 by 80 on the other. And so it's whatever the property can accommodate, the largest field possible. Of course, we make the older kids play the bigger fields, of course, and the younger kids play smaller. And that's how we do it. But this could service anyone from a U10, a U9, all the way up to a U16, U17 team.
That was my, if I may, that was my question, is that I think maybe we're underselling the population that we could be serving with the maximum field size by calling it a U12, that it might actually be usable by our community members well past age 12.
Absolutely. It's a standard size for adults. An adult
That was what I thought when I saw this, so that's why I wanted to get that
They
clarification.
always start at U12 to go to the full-size field.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Councilman Leonardis.
Mr. San Juan, you mentioned you'd be willing to contribute $100K annually, or what was the number?
We've been saving this up for, well, Dale's not here since probably 1996, and it's just we can afford a one-time check for $100,000. And then we had talked about supporting monthly and annually. I don't know what the numbers are yet, but we'd be willing to step up to the plate.
Okay, thank you very much. And one more question from Councilwoman McNutt.
Thank you. When the subcommittee saw different configurations in the early planning stages, my recollection is that this large of a field can also be broken into two smaller fields for the younger children, and I just wanted to confirm with you that that was correct.
Absolutely. We play on average, let's see, in Europe, what they'll do is they'll take the full-size field just like that, and they'll break it in half, and they'll just go to an 8v8 game or a 7v7. They also break the field into quarters, and they play smaller games. And that's how they actually do it. They break teams into four different little fields. But we could break it and have two games. You could do temporary painting, and so you wouldn't have to use the permanent markings. And you could adapt. You could change.
So that's another example of the maximum flexibility that I was trying to talk about. Because
Absolutely.
there's just, instead of having two separate fields, having one large that you can maneuver it for a lot of different ways for soccer or potentially for something
Break into
else.
thirds, quarters for the real smallers. For the U6s, that's one of the other problems we're having is finding a place for the U6s. Cutest game in the world, but they require the small space, and to put them all in one spot would be great. Traffic would be a nightmare, but maybe.
But they're little people.
They're little people, that's right.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, at this point in time, I think we need to give council's direction to staff. Going with Mr. Capurso's orientation to us, we have reviewed the report, and now it's a question of accepting, but my assumption is that there should be some inclination or orientation that you would like. My own orientation is to move towards what is called the preferred concept. Okay, it seems to me the most vetted of the concepts. It seems to me the one that received the most consistent response from our public as it reviewed this in the 3 sessions that you had. And looking at the question of maximum flexibility, the larger the field, the more flexible we have, the more flexibility we have to provide the different services that we're looking at here. This would be, at this point in time, my orientation would be to exclude the hardscape, or the hard court, because of the loss of potential field space. As the Vice Mayor pointed out, we have to be very conscious of the limitations on parking that exist there, because we are obligated to fulfill our environmental expectations. But as part of our 10 points of the parameters of our 10 points, one was to be inclusive of additional parking through the relationship that we're going to develop with the business community that surrounds this, at least on the west and north sides. So we may be able to accommodate the offset in parking thereby. We're also looking at signalization at that intersection, and we're currently involved in traffic studies that will be inclusive of the impacts at University and Lark. Mr. Rouhani is going to work his magic out there so that there will be no car that stops for longer than 3 seconds at any one intersection. So it's all going to come together really nicely. But from the perspective of the council, I would just ask if there's any further discussion needs to take place, or if we can entertain a motion as was offered by Councilwoman McNutt. Any further discussion? Yes, Councilmember Leonardis.
More questions for staff. You know, I was talking a little bit earlier about John D. Morgan Park, and there's 7 soccer games out there. And yes, parking is not the greatest. I have to walk a half mile sometimes with all the equipment to the field. And I definitely wouldn't want to see a situation like that. But I guess the question is, how did you arrive, or how is the parking study being handled? I think of teams. Mr. San Juan mentioned 11 on 11, so that's 22 players, essentially 22 kids, which basically means 22 cars, and we have, you mentioned, is it 59 spots being proposed? So I'm just having difficulty seeing why we need such a half acre of parking for an acre of field that's quite sparsely populated. Again, we paid a premium for this property, and I would like to see a real definitive study of why there needs to be that much parking lot. I really feel strongly that for the price we paid, we can serve a greater part of the community. I love the soccer community, part of it, but when you think of a sports complex, you think of more uses than primarily just one field or a field split in half. So I feel like there is an opportunity to get something else in the parking lot area or somewhere on this property to serve more of the community.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Just a comment for staff based on the testimony from Mr. San Juan. I think for future drawings and such, we should remove the U12 reference. I think it's misleading. Bias against the usability of the field, and maybe even just remove soccer. If you want to leave lines on there, that's fine. But if we're pushing the fact or advertising the fact that this is a multi-use field, I would hate the implication or the inference to be drawn that this is not a multi-use field.
Although people might figure this out, actually, depending on how many of those round soccer balls end up on the field. I'm not averse to what you're recommending. I don't think we actually have to go there. I think, as upfront as we possibly can, given the fact the community has come out pretty generally to support this as a soccer facility, and we're saying, we see the opportunity for other sports, lacrosse, for example, using the same facility. But I would not shy away from what we're actually dedicating ourselves to, because that's really what we're going to attempt to do. Any other comments or questions? All right. Councilwoman McNutt, did you want to make a motion?
Certainly, I will move that council accepts the staff report outlining the Creekside Sports Park project and the conceptual design that is currently the preferred conceptual design.
All right. And I just want to make a point of clarification to the motion. And in so doing, we are accepting the preferred option, and the information contained in the Parks Commission report is seen as advisory or informational solely. It's not part of a motion that would be inclusive of the specific recommendations that they made at that time. Is that correct? Okay. All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
A second.
The Vice Mayor seconds the motion. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Passes 4-1 with one nay, and that would be Council Member Leonardis. We're going to take a 4-minute break, okay, because we're looking eagerly to our budget discussion, and because we're so eager, I don't want us to just be too excited. And so we're going to take a little break here, and then we'll come back in 4 minutes, and we'll lead off with the last item on the agenda. Well, other than the press, it looks like we've lost our audience. But we have the staff. All right, this brings us to the operating and capital budgets, and I would ask that we draw our attention to page 11 of the staff report, where it says budget presentation. Just a reminder that this is the process we will follow, those 6 bullets. And hopefully we will be very efficient in our processing, because we are much better earlier than later. So if I could ask the manager to initiate the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The documents you should have in front of you are the capital improvement program that was distributed a week and a half ago, the proposed operating budget from last week, the staff report that was included in the council binder, and then we have copies of the slides in front of you that we will be using tonight. Before I outline the presentation we'll be making, I first do want to acknowledge your audience, which is the staff that has pulled this budget together. And I want to acknowledge all the directors who have participated, as well as the finance staff, and singling out our director, Steve Conway, our assistant director, Jenny Hariyama, and Gita Ngvari, who's sitting in the middle of the bottom row, who have prepared this budget document for us with input from the manager's office, your prior input from the retreat, as well as from the department directors and employees. The finance director told me just before we started that the budget balanced, so we thought we'd conclude staff presentation.
All right. Any other further objections?
Moving along, we do have a few more presentations to make. The finance director will give you a brief overview of the budget from a holistic view, and then move from the revenues and expenditures for next year to looking at the updated 5-year forecast, the most significant aspect of which is we're now showing in that 5-year forecast an annual 20% reduction in revenues from Netflix due to the advent of streaming movie distribution and business changes in the technology marketplace. So we're being, we think, realistically conservative in that inevitable loss of revenue, given that the federal and state government do not allow for sales taxation of digital product, and that's what streaming videos are. The second part of the presentation will be by Jenny Hariyama, where we will present a brief overview of the major highlights in each department, with each of the directors available to answer any questions after that departmental summary, as you may wish. I did want to highlight that one of the key changes in that departmental highlights section will be the executive reorganization that I am proposing jointly with the town attorney, where with no increase in staffing and no increase in personnel expenditures, we are able to realign staff work in the executive offices to work more efficiently and to meet new emerging council priorities, particularly in regards to community outreach and emergency preparedness, with a reallocation of Jackie Rowe's position to be our new community outreach coordinator. Under additional policy items, I'll be coming back to the microphone to present a number of items presented in the staff report, including the new reserves policy that has been developed by your finance committee and is recommended for you tonight. Then we'll turn it over to Todd Capurso, Director of Parks and Public Works, to present the CIP, including, pursuant to your direction at your retreat in January, the first-time funding of Almond Grove Street reconstruction, which is now included in the CIP for the first time. And then, of course, we'll have comments from the extensive public prior to council discussion and direction. So with that, I'll turn it over to our director, Steve Conway.
Thank you, Mayor Brzezinski, members of council. My pleasure again tonight to present to you the budget overview for the fiscal year 11-12 budget. And this budget was prepared in an era or a climate of continued fiscal uncertainty. As council's aware, we have coming out of a recessionary period. So our revenue challenges remain. However, we do see some improvement, but I will tell you that the 11-12 revenues that we budget in this proposed budget do reflect low or no growth in some cases, very flat growth, and chiefly that would be in property tax. The growth is, it's actually positive news for Los Gatos. We're projecting no growth as opposed to negative growth, which has been experienced by many cities in Santa Clara County. So we're fortunate that we're actually proposing a stable property tax, very little growth, approximately 0% growth in that area. But in other of our revenues, we do, especially in sales tax, we have seen some increase in the past 6 months, and we expect that trend to continue. That has been a statewide trend. I'm sure that the council's heard that the state of California's revenues are surprisingly coming in a little stronger than expected, and we weren't surprised as much in finance because we knew the state's sales tax revenue was increasing at a clip that was ahead of their estimates. So we are experiencing the same thing in the town. And a lot of our non-Netflix revenue in terms of sales tax is showing some growth across most of our sectors. It is not enough, however, to make up for the loss of Netflix over the 5-year period, and I'll talk about that in our 5-year financial forecast that I discussed. And the other chief factor that we have is that our personnel costs continue to increase faster than our revenues, chiefly due to retirement benefit costs. These are not for any enhancements that the town has given in terms of an 11-12 budget, but it just is the fact that PERS is raising our employer rates due to their portfolio losses that they've experienced in the past years. Largely due to that reason is the increase in those rates that we have to factor in our budget. And then we have GASB 45, which is our employee retirement pension, employer retirement medical contributions that we make. We are ramping that up over a 10-year period, and so those costs also were incorporated in the 11-12 budget. We came into the budget period with a strategy to provide or develop a budget that maintains service levels, and we feel that this budget does do that in a very difficult climate, as I've said. And as the town manager mentioned, we did incorporate organizational efficiencies into that, using technology where we could to save the cost of save dollars in the terms of cost of providing services. I will tell you that the budget is still after 11-12, we expect our budget to still remain very strong. We have very healthy reserves. We expect to have around $18 million in general fund reserves available in place at the end of fiscal year 11-12. I mentioned that our property tax and our assessed valuations remain strong, which is another sign of a very healthy community. And we will continue our emphasis on economic vitality efforts to diversify our portfolio. As you know, a big portion of our revenue that we use to fund services is obtained through sales taxes collected by economically vital businesses located here in the town. We had a $2.1 million budget gap that we brought to council at the staff retreat. That was reduced to $1.3 million due to the fact that we were able to apply $800,000 of our Netflix set aside as a one-time to then reduce our gap to a $1.34 million gap that we dealt with. And that gap was met in the 11-12 proposed budget largely through staffing, $800,000, including $340,000 of a furlough was achieved. So there's an $800,000 staffing and salary benefit reductions. We also had operating cost reductions of $420,000 and an additional $120,000 in fee adjustments and transfers. So this is at a very high level, but this is how we were able to bridge our gap. And if we can see, you'd see that gap was bridged to the total of $1.34 million. And if we can move to the next slide, you will see that by achieving that budget gap, we now have before council, in terms of our general fund budget, a balanced budget, and that occurs on the next slide. And that balanced budget is $37.1 million of total sources of revenue for the general fund. And these are conservatively estimated and a total use of $37.1 million. And that $37 million includes $4.5 million of transfers. Those transfers are largely for capital projects in 11-12. So the $4.5 million would be subtracted from the 37.1 to arrive at what our operating expenses are, because the $4.5 million is for capital needs, our capital project budget that's funded out of the general fund. Looking quickly at the updated 5-year forecast, I mentioned, and the manager mentioned, that we expect Netflix technology and business methods to impact our sales tax in that area. We also see other revenue, though, trending up in our portfolio. So we've included some positive forecasting and forecast assumptions in that area. And we do have our rising pension and health costs that we had to factor in. And you can see that when you look at the future challenges that will be shown on our updated 5-year forecast chart, we do still expect to experience continued shortfalls in future years based on our current assumptions about the future, which I might add, we have not factored in salary increases in those forecasts. They're flat. So it's these other costs that impact us, and our revenues are not growing sufficiently at this time to cover those costs. So we do anticipate in future years that we will have approximately $1.2 million in budget gaps that we'll be dealing with. And these are levels that I feel confident that the town can manage, because we've dealt with similar budget shortfalls in the past. It just gets more difficult every year as we do this, because we the budget, the service levels without impact to the community gets more difficult each year that we address this. So we expect that there'll be future major budget adjustments necessary to meet this gap, and we would foresee that some of the money that we have set aside very prudently from Netflix likely will be needed to maintain service levels in the future as we transition out of the Netflix revenue scenario into a more, what I would say, a normal revenue scenario that we've had prior to our Netflix era. So you can see in the chart that we do show a gap that we will be dealing with in the future, and our expenditure trends are exceeding our revenue trends, and that continues to be a challenge that we will be dealing with in the future. I mentioned, and I'll go to our next slide, I mentioned also that we do expect, though, with our 11-12 budget, that we will have approximately $18 million in reserves. We have a reserve policy, so recommendation tonight, so the titles of we haven't changed the titles of our designated reserves, but you can see that we expect to have approximately $6 million and of revenue stabilization, which also will be added with our economic uncertainty reserves of approximately $40 million. So approximately $10 to $11 million of what I would of that 18 million is what I would say would be our reserves that we could go to in terms of budget assistance or service level assistance in the future. So that's a very strong position to be in. And I'd be happy to answer any questions for council. That ends my part of the presentation.
All right, questions for Mr. Conway. I have a question.
Sure.
Let's go back to the updated 5-year forecast, the graph. As the manager indicated at the beginning of this presentation, we have a balanced budget. Should have stopped there. Now, the question I have is when we're looking at fiscal year 11-12 versus fiscal year 12-13, how do we account for that significant drop at this point in time, given everything that we have been discussing up to this point relative to, yes, a projection of some revenue stream losses because of Netflix changing business plan, but we also have some upticks in property tax return and some benefit in the sales tax. Would you look through that, Mr. Conway, for us?
Yes. If we look at the first year following our 11-12 balanced budget, you can see that the revenues take a substantial dip. That is because there is approximately $3 million of revenue that we're using was available for capital projects that no longer in 11-12 that we moved from our Vasona, our sports park. We brought in $2.7 million of revenue to pay for that in 11-12. That's a one-time use for a capital, so it drops out of our revenue picture. So starting from 12-13, you can see more of a flat revenue across the board. So that is our new reality, our new base. The expenditures above also include, and I will double check this, but I believe they include the transfers out to fund our capital program. So it looks a little strange, but the numbers do play out. We would probably need a third line that would show to get more at the 1.2 million. Another line would probably be necessary to add to our graph that would be in the middle of those two lines that would break out the true operating cost out of that red line. And I think we'll probably do that as at our next opportunity to discuss this. But there should be one more line as I look on this now that would show the gap, not quite as large as that because we have some capital in that red line that needs to be accounted for.
All right, Mr. Manager.
And to orient you to the staff report, if you turn to page 5 of the staff report that includes the entire 5-year forecast, the red line of expenditures reflects the total expenditures and allocations at the bottom, or like the fourth line up from the bottom, while the green line reflects the revenues, which are the total revenues and transfers in the middle of the page. And you can see all the changes in each column. And specifically, looking at the revenue side, this next to last line is use of reserves deposits. That's 2.7 of the Vasona Park funds that are projected to be used next year, but don't carry forward to the next year. That's why there's such a big drop between those 2 years.
So actually, what's happened is that 2.7
we're spending it
that we have had to celebrate in our financials. We're actually going to utilize it, and at that point in time, it drops out.
It drops out, correct.
Okay.
Which makes it look like
But we
big
gain a
dip.
sports park, so
Yeah,
that's
correct.
That's the value.
And the other big change that the bottom 3 lines of the 5-year forecast that the director presents to you every year, but it's near impossible to show on a graph, is per your prior direction, we balance every year. And once you balance the next year, it reduces the gap through a flow through to the following year. So this looks like a $3 million up to a $4 million gap all at once, but per your prior direction, we deal with it in smaller bites of about 1.3 million a year. That softens that curve line. This is the worst case presentation.
All right, thank you. Other questions from council? Mr. Conway, I think you've done your job.
I was going to add just one more small piece to that gap too, is that those out years do assume that, and the line that the revenue line would, or the expenditure line, the red line would tend to dip down because we assume in 12-13 we'll have made service level adjustments, dropping our cost, our baseline cost down. And in the future, we have to assume in finance that we've made those changes. So when we look at our gaps, we assume if we had a $2 million gap, which we saw $1 million of that gap through a service level adjustments, that would affect years, the out years, and lower those costs. And so there is that assumption made when I mentioned the $1.2 million, is that each year that we solve $1 million of the problem, our baseline cost of service goes down by $1 million and continues.
So when we see this graph next year,
yes,
it's going to look much different than it does at this point.
It will always change. It's an ongoing dynamic chart that changes over time. Yes.
So it's one of these graphs that you wish you'd not included in the report?
No, just hard to explain. You know, in terms of, there's a lot of moving parts in a simple graph.
Understood. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, then I believe it's Ms. Hariyama's opportunity to speak
Great.
to us.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The first item for discussion is going to be departmental highlights in terms of budget adjustments made in each of the departmental programs. I'll be moving through the budget starting from the transmittal letter all the way through the library. And first we'll be discussing staffing changes and salary reductions. The manager may have alluded to the administrative structuring in his opening comments. That essentially is better aligned aligning clerk functions with the legal services. We're consolidating our customer service efforts and also integrating the community services department into the town manager's office, which is reflected in the budget. More importantly, we're reallocating resources for community outreach coordinator at no cost to the town. And what's key about that is that will be instrumental in achieving the council's strategic goal of enhancing emergency preparedness. These issues are discussed on A3 and A4 of the transmittal letter. Also mentioned on A4, the transmittal letter, are that we are using furloughs to help balance the budget of $340,000. Coupled with that would be the overtime reductions, primarily in the police department and Parks and Public Works, which amount to $120,000. Next is Community Development Department. We are recommending a transfer of an existing .40 FTE to provide additional support for the below market price program. Comments on that can be found on D86, and that's .05 will be allocated to the building department, and on page D93, the remainder .35 will be allocated to the BMP program. Moving to the police department. One of the significant changes there is the implementation of the 12-hour shift, which began this March. And what some of the benefits are going to be of that is we'll be seeing an increase in patrol staffing on each shift. This will enable us to make that big reduction in overtime, anticipated to be about $100,000. And also we'll be able to secure the future elimination of a vacant sergeant position as a result of that change. Information on this is found on D117. Okay, moving to Parks and Public Works, we have a couple of changes here. We're going to be limiting the standby overtime during the storm season only. That's on D157. Also proposes a reduction of a tree trimmer, found on D169. And then finally, a reclassification of a facility a technician to a parks maintenance worker, found on D185. And then last is the library. In your budget tonight is a proposed reduction in library hours, which includes the closing on Sundays. This impacts the library in a couple of different ways. There will be a proposed FTE reduction of .25 found throughout different areas in the program budget, as well as a reduction in temporary staff. So D 223, 225, and 235 discusses this strategy. And then last, we also have an opportunity to enhance our collections, particularly for the new library opening day, through the strategic use of our trusts funds, and you can find information on that on D237. That concludes my remarks. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And our staff is here, and we have a mic that can be taken to any place in the house that Pamela Jacobs will be working tonight for us. So if there are questions that are specific to Ms. Hariyama or Mr. Conway, or certainly our manager, then the council, please ask those at this point. And if there are some questions that require the director, him or herself, to respond, then we'll go ahead and make sure those responses get taken care of. We'll start over here with Councilwoman McNutt.
Actually, just a procedural question. Mayor, did you want to go through department by department, or just helter-skelter? What's your pleasure?
I prefer not to use the helter-skelter term, but I think that the idea of moving from the department to department as it's outlined in the document would be appropriate. So that would mean that as questions arise of a specific nature, that we'll ask them in turn. So is there any more general question that needs to be answered by either Mr. Conway, Mr. Larson, or Ms. Hariyama at this point in time from the general overview? Seeing none, then we will work the department budgets. And first off would be anything related to town offices, administrative services. Let's start there. Question, yes.
Thank you, Mayor. I had two questions related to administrative services. The first is referenced on page D47, the $65,000 that's being earmarked for community emergency preparedness education efforts. I wondered if staff could talk a little bit about how that money will be spent or how a plan will be formulated to spend that money?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I can handle that question. The council annually allocates $25,000 for our ongoing emergency preparedness work, largely related to the CERT classes as well as the October Prepared Month activities. Last year, the council approved an extraordinary one-time allocation of $40,000 that has not been spent yet. So staff is recommending we roll that over to next year to create a combined pot of $65,000. And with the reallocation of the staff position to create the new community outreach coordinator, that position working with Sergeant Carrie Harris and the police department and the other directors will be bringing a work plan to the Emergency Preparedness Subcommittee, which currently consists of Mayor Brzezinski and Councilwoman McNutt, in July with a work plan for next year in fulfillment of the council's strategic priority. It's our anticipation that these additional funds will be focused in two areas, working with the fire department on emergency evacuation for wildfire and or flooding, which we view County Fire really taking the lead on, but we'll have a support role. And second, personal emergency preparedness, which has been outlined as a council priority previously.
All right. Any
my
further?
second?
Please.
My second is, I believe it would fall under administrative services, and council may not be aware of this, but it recently came to my attention that next year is the 125th anniversary of the town of Los Gatos. And I have been talking some with the manager. We probably need to do something about that. And whatever we do probably is going to cost $1 or $2. So would it come out of administrative services? And as council figures out what it wants to do, if anything, to celebrate this milestone, how would you locate the funds for that?
In administrative services is the correct place to allocate the funds. It would specifically be under the non-departmental listing, which runs from D45 through D47, and the council at its discretion could put in a new allocation. For example, I'll just $20,000 or $50,000, I'm not sure the order of magnitude being looked for a Quates and whatever the word is, 125-year anniversary for the town, and that would be used as plans are prepared. There are no funds allocated for that purpose at this time. The only readily available source of funds for that would be the reserves or any unspent revenues from the current fiscal year.
Please.
Follow up. So is it better for council at some point to give direction to staff to say, figure out a reasonable amount in the final budget to bring forward, or to just wait and see how things evolve and then come back mid-year?
What I would recommend, given the director just whispered in my ear, that we work with the council to come up with a proposal for next year. Any immediate allocations prior to the mid-year budget review could be done from existing line items in the budget, and then if there's a mid-year correction needed, bring that forward to you at that time.
All right, that makes sense. Any other questions? We're still in administrative services. Seeing none, then we're going to go on to community development. Ms. Rooney is on the hot seat on this one. Questions regarding community development. This is in the D section. Yes, Councilwoman McNutt.
I had two, and one relates to the position related to the BMP, the below market priced housing, and it's talked about on both D66 and D94. And since we have such a relatively small inventory of BMP units, I was curious as to why that much time needs to be allocated just for that function.
It's on.
We're not having problems.
Thank you. I can answer that. It could be maybe you can move, Steve. Thank you. It could be a sign of the times, but we are finding that we're spending considerable amount more time on the BMP program dealing with issues such as foreclosures, with either tenants or, well, primarily, in this case, it'd be owner-occupied, that are close to foreclosure, that we're helping to put in contact with Project Sentinel and different organizations that can help try to mediate issues between tenants and, between tenants and landlords, and between also owner-occupied and their banks or their HOAs, where we're finding some problems. So we're actually spending a considerable amount of time in the BMP program right now. Some other issues that we're facing, we're having some difficulties with the Housing Authority, who manages our contract for housing verification or income verification, annual compliance monitoring to ensure that the recipients are still meet program guidelines for living in these units. They've laid off staff, they've had staff retire, so we're actually picking up a lot of their responsibilities, and it's an ideal time, however, because our contract is up for renewal this year, and we may end up bringing those functions back in-house and saving the cost of that contract. So historically, we were budgeting at about 0.3 FTEs, and with having Linda join our department, we felt that we could expand our services, we could be faster in our services. And just to give you a comparison, we've had this program for a year. In community services, they were budgeting about 0.4 FTEs. So I think for the time being, until the housing market settles, I think that 0.6 makes sense. And we feel that we can expand our services, again, be faster in our responses, and do a better job of managing our program.
All right.
And I had
Please.
one other one in this section, and that's on page D85. And, of course, it's about online permitting. So I have brought up online permitting in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and now we're at 2011 budget. How are we doing? We are not doing well on moving along on that, in my opinion. And I'm comparing us to what I consider to be the gold standard, which is the city of Sunnyvale. So my question is, very briefly, how are we progressing? And more importantly, could we estimate what it would cost to contract with whoever it would be necessary to actually get us set up once and for all with widespread online permitting for our residents?
Let me ask the latter part of the question, or respond to the latter part of the question first. I think we'd have to take a look at exactly what it would cost to be able to fully implement online permitting. We haven't done that. We've always looked at this, at least under my tenure, as a progressive process. I do have, I think, good news for the council in that we've been working with our primary impediment to online permitting is that our database, our permit database, which is Acela, and our financial package, which is Finance Plus, do not communicate with one another. So we are not able to people cannot pay for their permit online. You cannot put those two systems together so that they could go through our Finance Plus system to pay for their permit online. So as I understand, that's been the primary impediment. We were working with a consultant for the last year or so and not really getting anywhere, and constantly being billed for work that seemed like it wasn't being done. And we recently started contracting with a new consultant. And we're feeling that it's called True Point Solutions, and we're feeling that they're much more responsive, and they've told us that within about 80 hours they should be able to have a work plan for us to be able to tell us what we would need to do to implement, or what needs to be done to the systems to be able to implement that. So my staff have indicated that they feel confident in 11-12 we'll be implementing mechanical, electrical, and plumbing permits for furnace replacement, for service panel upgrades, and water heater replacements online, which are pretty common types of permits and an easy one to do online. And then I asked them to project out in 12 and 13 what they thought, and we're looking at adding to that re-roofs. One of the issues we face is that we have a lot of historic structures, so we cannot allow for online permitting for that because we have to review those. And then also in our high fire hazard areas, we have to be, we really have to take a look at the plans and have them submitted and have some time to take a look at that and make sure that they're complying with the requirements for those areas. We also feel that we'll be able to do window replacements, and I think I mentioned gas line upgrade sizing. I don't think I did, actually. So we're expanding the program. I don't think we'll quite meet that gold star. I think we'd have to find out exactly, do an assessment to find out what it would cost to do that, and we can do that and report back to the council.
I think if I can just make a closing sentence on this, it's going to come up again when we're in capital budget because there's the process, document imaging is in there also. And as we face more and more difficult budget decisions, I would be interested in knowing what a one-time investment of funds, let's say from reserves, could potentially do in terms of saving us money long-term, productivity, staff time, on these routine matters that technology should be able to take care of it for us. And faxing back a form is not really what I have in mind.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Other questions for community development? Not bad. So we're going to move on to the police department. This would be starting at D99. Any questions of council for PD? As Ms. McNutt is looking for her page, just a note for you. The manager offered us opportunity as council to do clarification over the weekend, and each of us took the opportunity, and we do appreciate his attention to our needs, and I think that a lot of the questions that we had were asked and answered in that process, even up to the 11th hour today to get some of these questions answered. But I do know that Councilwoman McNutt has a follow-on question for the police department.
And actually, Mayor, it's not a question. It's 2 points that I wanted to call attention to, and one is on page D109, where it references the department's entering into a feasibility study with other jurisdictions about shared dispatch services and what might be possible in that. And I don't know if that'll work out or not, but I think it's the kind of innovative thinking that we're going to need, again, as we go into more difficult budgets in coming years. And then I also wanted to just call everyone's attention on page D123, where it's talking about traffic program and the traffic index, which was implemented a couple years ago. And if you compare that to the chart at the bottom that talks about the number of traffic collision reports and the number of injury collisions, you can see that apparently it really is having an impact. And I consider that a significant reduction in collisions. And we hear so much about and experience so much ourselves on traffic that it's good to know that it's annoying, but it's not actually producing accidents, I think, as a result of the traffic index tactics.
All right. Wonder if the chief would be willing to comment on both of those, both the integration of services, for example, the communications integration, and then how you feel the interpretation of the statistics on traffic has benefited by the orientation of the department at this point.
As we stated in last year's budget document, we were seeking to explore empirical evidence of the value of consolidating dispatch with Campbell specifically. It's taken us a while to get to the point of agreement on how to approach that project, and this last few months, we have prepared and have just released the request for proposal. We've gotten a number of responses back. We'll vet those. I'm guessing that there'll be a very credible number of providers who are situated on the West Coast who could provide that service. Our timeline is to have that reviewed and a decision made by September. I'm asking that we actually move it up a little bit. I'd offer to you, though, that in parallel, the police chiefs and the fire chiefs, really at the direction and urging of the City Manager Association, have begun exploring consolidated dispatch county-wide. And this is consistent with the work that I've been participating in on regional interoperability. It's a very important subset of that. It's not dependent on an integrated radio system, which is our ultimate goal under the larger project, but increasingly is making sense at appointed and elected official level across all cities. There isn't a specific work plan or timeline for that. It's still in exploratory stages, but I can say confidently that the consistency of promise and commitment to that is increasing. And as one example, a number of us took a trip to Salt Lake City in December to look at a regional dispatch center, and as you can imagine, just getting your eyes on one and understanding how it evolved from its first day 20 years ago till now, what you see now and the benefits you see are easily translatable to our region. So Sunnyvale, Los Altos, Palo Alto, and Mountain View are working hard to consolidate their dispatch centers. At the same time, we're in a purchase for a new dispatch, computer-aided dispatch system with Sunnyvale, which will allow us to do virtual dispatch consolidation, meaning they'll host the software and we'll be able to access the software here, so we won't have to buy two sets of the same hardware and software. And so that's kind of 3 bites at a consolidated dispatch apple, which I think are going to ultimately lead to improvements in efficiency. With regard to the traffic enforcement index, our traffic citations have typically been the issue that have kept that number below what the standard has been. We have increased our citations recently and still have a lot of room to grow. We want to try and find that balance where we're not issuing more citations than are really necessary to keep the accidents down. But accidents in this community obviously are very sensitive with bicyclists and the pedestrians and the number of kids out in the community. We really want to work hard to maintain traffic safety. So in addition to partnerships with BPW and the schools on safe routes, our officers are doing focused and targeted enforcement. I just concluded a month of cell phone distracted driver citations, which are, I believe, directly related to traffic safety and potential accidents, and most every officer contributed in a very significant way to that. So this number here, while you could argue maybe is slightly above the language in the small print that starts to get above what the preferred level is, we think on average, given where we've been, we're still in an acceptable range.
Thank you very much, Chief. All right. Other questions for the police department? Seeing none, that takes us to Parks and Public Works. This continues in the D category. Issues for PPW. There's this lean over here on my right, and Mr. Capurso thought he was going to skate on this one, but fortunately not. Not.
Actually, this isn't a question. This is a suggestion to staff, and it's regarding on page D190, the non-point source program, and which I'm highly sensitive to in my other role as chair of the West Valley Sanitation District, which I fondly refer to as the sewer board, that I think it might be interesting to have a presentation, maybe a demonstration of the new trash capture devices. It might be good to think about how to work public education into the VISTA and our website, and what residents and businesses can do to help keep pollutants out of storm drains, because there are a lot of basic things that people aren't aware of that they just do as a normal course of daily life that actually can impact that. And at some point, we might even need to do a briefing of council on the NPDES regulations and the potential threats that they pose to our budget that I'm not sure is on our radar, that I would completely understand, but I know it can be quite scary, depending on how strict they are, and with no funding.
I'd like to just reinforce that last position. We know that there's some very stringent regulations that are going to impact us in a financial manner, and they're always, it's kind of like a work in progress at this point in time. But things that we thought we could do, we can't do any longer. I know Saratoga has a pilot program going where they are putting together a package to do the kinds of legal fulfillments that are expected. Would you comment to that? I think it's a really interesting point.
Yes, be happy to. On the NPDES program, obviously we've got a great partner that we work with on that, and that's the West Valley Clean Water Program, which, as Councilmember McNutt knows, is overseen by the Sewer Board. And so we do work cooperatively with them, particularly on the education components. So we will ensure that we coordinate with that group and make sure that we're better coordinated, not only internally with our own community development department, but with West Valley Clean Water and how we educate our residents and our businesses. With regard to the trash capture devices and some of the other points you mentioned, we're certainly heading in the direction of entering new territory, which we have not yet been mandated to do. And so in this first full year of the new stormwater permit, we will be installing somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 trash capture devices. And while at this point we haven't been able to put a firm financial figure on what the increases in maintenance costs will be, we can certainly quantify that in service level terms, because as you also know by pages 189 and 190 in the D section, is that one of the ways we're going to accommodate the servicing of these new installations in our catch basins is with the reduction in the residential street sweeping schedule. So we're going to create some capacity on our end by doing residential street sweep. I cannot say that tonight. Residential street sweeping on a monthly basis rather than on a once every 3-week basis, and use that additional time to service these new installations. We expect, and again, this is expectations as opposed to what's really going to come down the pike in the permit, that the number of trash capture devices will be a moving target, and it will move in the upward direction. Yes. So there will come a point where we can no longer create capacity to service those installations, but we'll have to seek alternate methods.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I might add, because of our concerns, we've actually had NPDES in the last several budgets as an emerging future challenge, especially given the Bay Area permit. Because of continuing issues we've raised, the county city managers have commissioned a study to look at how each jurisdiction is approaching this, as well as best practices elsewhere, because there's a few counties who are ahead of us in terms of acting on NPDES, and to look at alternative funding models. And that's being done through the Leadership Academy that Los Gatos actually started for all the cities a year and a half ago. In addition, Jenny and I were at a meeting on Friday of the City Manager's Department. It's a big enough issue statewide. We're looking at some statewide education and outreach on the issue to learn how do we grapple with what could be a tidal wave of increased regulatory costs.
I think that's the main concern, is that the tidal wave seems to be out there, and this is another one of those unfunded mandates as far as we can tell. All right, any other comments for PPW? Yes, Vice Mayor Rice.
Thank you. I can't let Councilmember McNutt have all the fun. I had submitted a number of questions. I've gotten a lot of the answers, but I wanted a little clarification on page 183 around vehicle energy efficient vehicles and fleet management and the like. The question I have had to do with tracking the total cost of operation and ownership of vehicles in general, and whether or not we're saving money or costing ourselves money by purchasing hybrids or CNG vehicles or some alternative. And the answer that I got back from the manager is we are looking at the total cost structure, but there was a line that you put in that I wanted to get a little more clarification. Compliance with Bay Area regulations for buying low emissions vehicles. Is this potentially another one of those unfunded mandates that the mayor just referred to, that some rule that we have to follow?
It is a rule that we have to follow. In fact, there's a set of rules that we have to follow, and they're not necessarily new, and they don't really pertain per se to new purchases. What they do is they maintain to the overall cleanliness and emissions of the total fleet. And so as we purchase new pieces of equipment, new vehicles, we have a very high level of confidence that they will comply. The issues that we address, though, are because we keep pieces of equipment and vehicles in our fleet for many, dare I say, many years, we have a fair number of vehicles, particularly those that run with diesel engines that are 15 to 20, even older than that. And so we have to make some financial decisions about is that vehicle worth retrofitting. The most common example is that in some cases we have to install a diesel particulate filter, otherwise known as DPFs. I'm sure you've seen that come forward before. And we do a cost analysis of the value of that vehicle and the level of investment that would be required to make that vehicle compliant, as opposed to the outright purchase of a new vehicle and what the expected life the expected useful life of that vehicle would be. So it's not just about the purchases of a new vehicle, but sometimes it's the purchase of, if you should actually make a purchase of a new vehicle, sometimes a little bit earlier than you would otherwise, because you need to bring yourself into compliance. It's a purchase that we would have to make anyway, and in some cases we've accelerated those by a year, 2 or 3 in order to gain compliance.
I'm good for now on that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, I think we can go on to Community Services. Comments or questions or issues for Community Services Department? Then that takes us to the library. And I do think we have a couple of comments about the library here. Councilwoman Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to jump in here before Ms. McNutt. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Larson. I did have a lot of questions, and staff spent a lot of time talking to me, so I've been able to go down basically to one question left. I had explained to the town manager that if I had any questions remaining, I would bring them forward before everybody, and the one I had remaining had to do with the library. Right now, the staff suggestion is that the library close on a Sunday. I think it saves us $65,000 a year annually. And my question was, is there any other methodology, any other way to do that savings without closing the library on Sunday? And I believe the answer is yes, but I will defer to Mr. Larson.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you. We've heard many questions regarding the proposed closure of the library. It would be a reduction of 2 hours in total operating hours and moving 2 hours from Sunday to Saturday, resulting in a Sunday closure. That does generate a projected budget savings of $65,000, as mentioned by Ms. Spector. If the council wishes to not implement that reduction, we should receive that direction from you tonight. We will then make the changes in the actual final budget documents that will be brought forward to you on your consent calendar on June 6th for final adoption. In terms of where the $65,000 comes from to restore the Sunday hours, I think there's 2 options that are best available. One is I do think it's appropriate to look at the reserves, even in light of the new reserves policy you'll be acting on tonight, which does call for the use of reserves to prevent what will be a hoped temporary reduction in services. And certainly as we open a new library, it's appropriate to consider the use of reserves to maintain the existing level of library services. In addition, the staff had previously identified at the mid-year budget review, and we believe it continues to hold, that we will likely have a one-time availability of excess revenues over expenditures for the current year. We've currently salted that away to deal with potential state cuts, but that would be an alternative source of funding for the $65,000 to pay for library operations next year.
All right, thank you. Councilwoman Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It would be, at least this council person's request, that options be brought forward to us. I am very hesitant to use reserves, but I would certainly welcome any thoughts. But as I sit here right now, if I had to choose something other than reserves, I probably would. But of course, I'm going to have to be educated on what staff's thoughts are.
All right, other comments? Councilwoman Spector? You're next. Councilwoman Spector. I'm sorry.
My hand's down.
I know. I wanted you to continue speaking. Councilwoman McNutt, and then the Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I also am not fond of the idea of closing on Sunday. I don't think that all hours are created equal. So it's good to look at a total number of hours of service, but you can't be open 2 days, 24 hours, and say 48 hours, and really have it be functional and convenient for the residents. We recently got some statistics on the ever-increasing growth of library use, both in terms of visitor count and circulation. It's not unique to Los Gatos, but I think what is going to be unique to Los Gatos this next year is the accelerated growth because of the new library and because of actions of other library systems around us, whether that be the fee that the county library system is going to be placing on non-residents of the cities they serve for use, or whether it's going to be additional cutbacks in San Jose Library. They're going to be coming here, and I don't think it's a time to be cutting back on hours. I know in one of the references on youth services, it was talking about a decrease in some staffing, just a minimal decrease in staffing. I would be very nervous about any kind of decrease at this particular point, because when we open those doors, they are going to come, and they're going to come big. And I think we need a year, and I can justify use of reserves for 1 year. As we open this, things shake out, and we see what we have. So I also would prefer if we could find money magically left over in this year's budget to fund that. But I would be open to using reserves next year to give the library the best shot at opening and serving the community as possible.
Okay, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I'm going to speak in agreement. I think it's important that we keep the library open on Sundays for a number of reasons. But one of the things that has troubled me as a taxpayer is I saw the city of San Jose pass a bond measure to build all kinds of new libraries, and they're beautiful, and they're closed because they haven't got the funds to operate them. And I think that if it means it has to come out of reserves for a year, I think we're going to see an extraordinary increase in use. We have a beautiful building being built 50 yards to my right, and I think that we need to have that open on weekends. I think that's a high usage time for students and families, and I think we need to find the money. If it has to come out of reserves, again, I'm open to it, but like Councilmember McNutt, if it can magically appear from unused funds this year, that would be wonderful.
I'm going to be in agreement. My concern is the next year and the year after that, and where do we go from here? Because I think we're in a kind of a perfect storm when it comes to our library. We're going to open the most beautiful library in the valley, that, as far as I'm concerned, even better looking than the San Jose libraries. And it's going to be an attractor. It's going to be, definitely a draw with the closure of Borders. We'll be the only show in town when it comes to literary. And with that in mind, I hope and I know we are beginning to project where we go from here, because we definitely need to have this library open and fully functioning from day one. And because we've built it, they will come. And with that in mind, I would like to see us put special attention into projections beyond this. The 65K should be able to be found in some place, even if it is a take from reserves, a one-time take from reserves, but that can't be the solution to whatever it's going to be costing us to continue to maintain our library fully functioning downstream. So that would be my recommendation to staff. Any other comments about the library? I think you've got a direction to travel on that.
So just to follow up, we will include in the budget we bring back to you on June 6th, no closure of the library on Sunday. That will be reflected in the document. And if we don't find any additional source of funding to use, we'll use reserves, or we could always revisit it at mid-year, but I think the council wants certainty of library operation. So we'll include that now and look for savings as we proceed.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm assuming that's it for the library, so now we have to have the opportunity to go to CIP. And I believe we're going to have Mr. Capurso come back and join us.
Oh.
Yes.
Before Todd speaks, there was actually, in the program we had presented you, I was just going to highlight a couple of the special issues that were in the staff report.
All right, please.
If we can keep it moving, Mazarin, you can do it quicker than I can.
Would that be
There we
additional
go.
policy?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Additional policy items. First, it segues perfectly from the library discussion into the general fund reserve policy, which is referenced on page 7 of the staff report and is attached to the staff report. This has been reviewed and recommended by your finance committee, as well as your staff. And to summarize, it sets the framework for our financial reserves. Mazarin, could I ask you to push the number 9 and hit return for me? This is the reserves listing that the director previously presented. What we would be doing is changing the name of the first two reserves to make them a little more clear. Basically to a disaster reserve and a recession reserve. That's my nicknames for them. It's not the formal names. The formal names would be, I'm pulling it up now in the policy. The catastrophic reserve would be the second one. The economic uncertainty reserve would be renamed catastrophic, and the budget stabilization reserve would be the new title for the revenue stabilization reserve. With this policy, you'd be setting a 12.5% of operating funds as the target for each of these reserves. Currently, the economic uncertainty reserve, soon to be called the catastrophic reserve, is underfunded by about $300,000. It would need to be brought up to $4 million, while the budget stabilization reserve, the first one currently called revenue, is overfunded by about $1.3 million. So we could do balancing in the budget to bring the catastrophic reserve up to 4 and still be $1.5 million over the minimum funding required for the two reserves. As we've talked about the challenges we face in the years ahead, the policy provides guidelines for both when it's appropriate to use, particularly the budget stabilization reserve, as well as to how to restore it in the following years after it's been used. And we think the guideline is a very prudent approach that reflects the council's prior direction. So it is recommended for you for approval tonight. If you could push 12 and hit return, we'll go back to the other issues. We also have a summary on page 7, 8, and 9 of our nonprofit support. And in particular, I wanted to highlight the last recommendation on the staff report. If you could push return, please. Regarding giving staff authority to begin discussions with owners of the current Los Gatos Theater, the Borders Bookstore, as well as the high school and any other interested parties for potential leasing, acquisition, or other provision of community theater space. and this would be another part of our outreach. Whereas you can see in the staff report, we support a significant number of nonprofits in this community through the provision of space to meet significant community needs. And this is one of the issues we have put before to you. Also, the Chamber of Commerce has asked for a very modest increase in their funding that we have included in the budget. It is a $2,000 increase, slightly less than the 10% they requested, and we think that could be linked to new service hours on Saturdays at their new location at the south end of downtown. Moving on, senior services, we're recommending that given our successful partnership with Los Gatos Saratoga Recreation Department and in consultation with them, that we broaden the Community Services Commission to take on the role as community and senior services. And this is actually something that was previously recommended by council in, I believe, the council confluence last fall. Town council expense allocation is just to reflect the changes we've made to the council's expenditure policy in compliance with changes to state law. We have our annual listing of donation opportunities attached to the report in compliance with the solicitation policy. And last, state budget impacts. The governor released the May revise today. The good news is it appears the previously projected taking of COPS funding, which we use with both Montessorino's funds and Los Gatos funds for enhanced traffic enforcement, is not immediately at risk in the governor's budget proposal. The governor is continuing to recommend the elimination of redevelopment agencies and counting on a $1.7 billion of savings to the state. Staff, and I'm sure the mayor, given his role on the League of California Cities Board, is a little bit flabbergasted by this because it seemed to have been a proposal that was virtually dead on arrival, both due to public outcry and questions about its legality. We are not recommending any change to the budget tonight other than what you previously directed, where we're holding $800,000 of excess revenues over expenditures from this year to deal with whatever the state ends up deciding to do, whether legal or not, so we can respond to that without being whipsawed through last-minute budget actions by the state. That concludes the additional policy items. There is a decrease to library funding, which hurts our library in a manageable level, but it creates significant problems for the county library system, which has led them to pursue an increased charge on hours and other residents for use of their library. That concludes the additional policy items that are included in your recommendations. Unless there's questions on that, now we can move to Mr. Capurso.
All right, unless there are questions, yes. Madam McNutt.
It's not a question of staff, it's a question of council, and it's regarding the Community and Senior Services Commission, which is, the resolution is attachment 4 of the staff report, which designates that 2 members of the board must be under 18. And I'm wondering, with the addition of the word senior in the title, it would be good to have 2 members designated to be senior, however it is we define senior, which I actually can't remember from the general plan update. I know it's been,
I think it's 55.
55, 62, or 65, depending
55.
on where it is in our documents.
I think
I think recreation might be 55, but I think we might be higher. But in any case.
I think we've gone to 55 as the standard from what I recall, but I could be wrong. There could be another document somewhere that has 62.
Following the council members' inquiry regarding this, we did check with the Recreation Department. They do use 55. We've had varying senior housing levels. 55 does seem to be one that's gaining traction, and given we see this commission working with Stephanie Douglas and the Recreation Department to help provide input on the programs provided at the Rec Department, we think 55 would be a reasonable age point.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
And we can incorporate that into the commission if so requested.
But the request is to add or to audit the membership and to make sure that we have two people represent the seniors.
To designate two as seniors, just as we designate two as youth.
All right, so we would have to take another look at that policy then.
Or I can give you the prospective wording change at this time.
Why don't you do that?
It would be, again, it's in the resolution attached to the staff report. It's attachment 4 under 1A, and it would be the second sentence. 7 are members over 18 years of age with 2 over 55 years of age, inclusive of 2 over 55 years of age.
All right. So what is the total then on the number of members?
It would remain 9, so there would be 2 under 18, 2 over 55.
Okay, so it's not an additional,
No,
it's
it's not an
just
additional.
an age breakout. Okay.
We'd be taking 2 of the 7 that have to be over 18 and making them over 55 as well.
Okay. When we come to the motions, then we can verify that. All right. Yes, Vice Mayor.
This might be a very little item that might end up being very big. After the conversation about the library and keeping it open on Sundays, and then talk about additional policy items, which we're just finishing up on. At some point, I think it's going to become incumbent upon this council, in light of the budget that we're looking at for the next several years, to come up with some kind of priority to guide budget preparation and decisions. I refer to it as tiering services. What is a top tier, tier 1 service? What is, putting police officers on patrol is a core function. Having the library open on Sunday sounds like it's a core function, tier 1 service. Maybe having, I don't want to pick something inadvertently or incorrectly and say it's not a tier 1 service, but there are things out there that may not be. I don't know how you want to address it. I just wanted to bring it up because I think it is a policy issue that we need to address over the next year or so to guide our budget in the future when we're looking at shrinking revenues and increasing expenses, and how we're going to get those two nice little green and red lines to always be together as to what our function as a town is, what services we will provide no matter what services we might cut before we go into reserves, or what ones we won't. So I just wanted to put that out there as something I think we need to address.
Well, I think we actually in retreat did mention the issue of essential and non-essential services, or essential and elective services. And as the budget moves forward or moves downward, as the case may be, that would become more and more important that we make that differentiation, so that we always are able to maintain our essential services in full compliance. But there may be other services that right now we deliver because they're extraordinarily valuable for quality of life, but they may not necessarily be essential services that we can continue to deliver as the budget picture changes. So I agree with you. All right. Now we'll go to the CIP development process. This is the proposal for the 2011-2016 capital improvement program, and of course, Mr. Caperso is going to give this one to us.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. It's my pleasure to talk about the proposed 2011-2016 capital improvement program. This is going to be tricky without the, okay. So in order to help us prepare the capital improvement program for the upcoming 5-year cycle, staff first evaluates the status of all current projects and their projected completion dates. We also assess the variety of funds available and their respective uses. In order to ensure compliance with the town's general plan, the proposed CIP is also reviewed by the Planning Commission. In general, the proposed CIP is healthy with a good variety of projects, although the 5-year total is less than it was in last 5-year cycle. Projects in fiscal year 11-12 take up the vast majority of program funds, with several new and continuing projects. However, there are several noteworthy projects planned for the outlying years as well. In the streets program, we'll carry forward the three prominent projects that we talked about in the 2010-11 process, the Blossom Hill Safe Routes to School project, the Wedgewood Avenue improvements, and the University Avenue Highway 9 intersection improvements. Continuing our focus along University Avenue, partly in an effort to stay ahead of the sports park project, we propose to proceed with resurfacing, guardrail replacement, and a new traffic signal at the intersection of University and Lark. The Almond Grove Street reconstruction project will also begin this year as we initiate the process to rebuild streets in this historic neighborhood, and we will continue our efforts in street repair and resurfacing. Like last year's successful Cape Seal project in the Bell Gatos and Garden Hill neighborhoods, we are planning similar work on some of our hillside streets and in the Bicknell area. So the goals in the streets program are to increase the overall pavement condition index with a focus on residential streets. We know that we have a high rating and very good condition streets in our arterials and collectors, but we've got to focus our efforts back on the residential streets. We will be protecting the town's investment by extending the useful life of our streets. And we have a goal to improve safety in all areas with particular emphasis on pedestrians and bicycles. In the parks program, as we talked about earlier, we will complete the master planning and design work for the new sports park and begin construction. We will make the pageant grounds more accessible and create a linkage to the new library. This park is really a hidden gem, I think, as you all know, and we've heard it called that by several others out in the community. This park, as it is made more accessible, will become a more integral part of the Civic Center complex. And on the public facilities side, of course, Council Member, I should say Vice Mayor Bryce, 50 yards to your right, as you said, we will complete the construction of the new library and open it in early 2012. And then immediately following, we will initiate a process to plan for the reuse of the existing library space and move forward with those improvements as well. As you can see, there is a wide variety of projects that will improve the quality of life for all town residents. We are pleased to present this proposed CIP and I would be happy to answer questions and provide additional information and clarification at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Caperso. I have a couple of quick questions at the beginning more to put an issue in front of us. On page A2, there's a reference in the, that would be, I guess, the third paragraph. We need to establish a reliable, dedicated source of funding for basic capital improvements beyond the use of accumulated reserves, and this remains a long-term need and goal. And this is like boilerplate language that we continually use. Reference to page A3, then something similar. The idea that the cost sharing of the property owners of curb, gutter, and sidewalk is presented as the second to last paragraph. And then on page A5, where you have those bullet points, the third bullet, explore the feasibility of general obligation bonds or an assessment district in specific areas. This is something that we have said we need to do, and it's, I think, probably as long as I can recall, we have not done, and we have not really started a process to develop this. We see these as specific tasks that should be done, that could be done, but as far as I know, we've not actually taken it beyond the should stage. Any thoughts about directions toward that at this point in time in our movement, given our financial situation?
Well, in terms of the funding sources, I'll probably refer back to Greg as far as looking at additional dedicated funding sources. As I'm sure you know, we take advantage of the ones that we have before us. We use the gas tax, which is at risk on occasion. We also have other grant funds that we take advantage of that are typically project specific, but in terms of ongoing dedicated funding sources, they're really not there. There's going to be an additional funding source available to us beginning in 2012-13 as part of the countywide Measure B that was passed last year. That will be a $10 surcharge that would be collected on your vehicle registration fees, and that will be essentially a return to source. But at this point, it looks like that would be a revenue in the $130,000 to $150,000 annually back to the town. So that's really not enough for us to initiate an additional program. For things like road work, the road maintenance in particular, not road work, but road maintenance like our slurry seal and Cape Seal activities, we haven't got anything at our disposal above and beyond gas tax at this point. So I'll hold that thought, put that on hold for just a second. With regard to the other way to come at this, which would be cost sharing of portions of the public right-of-way that are in front of private residences or businesses. As we all know, other municipalities have attempted to shift that burden, some more successful than others, and I think we can draw the conclusion that the municipality can never shift that burden entirely to the adjacent property owner, but there may be a way to approach that partially. We have not pursued doing that actively, but we do have some passive means at our disposal. So where we've had homeowners come forward and offer to remove their own tree or do some sidewalk work in front of their own property, we certainly allow them to do so at little or no cost on the application side, but that would really require a policy change at the council level.
All right. Well, I'm going to recommend that we consider these since we have them in front of us, and this is an opportune time. Mr. Manager.
And I just wanted to add, with the news we shared earlier about our 5-year forecast for Netflix-related revenues, it's the half of Netflix revenues that we set aside for reserves. One half of that half is what really funds the discretionary part of our capital program. And as Netflix revenues decline, that discretionary pot of capital funds declines as well. So it's going to be a rapidly emerging issue for us over the next couple of years. And I think it is timely to start taking the words we put in every budget and planning to work towards it.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Councilwoman Spector.
Thank you. Relating to the sports park, University Avenue, Lark, what plans, if any, are there for a bicycle path from the park north on University to Lark? Is there anything in that regard? Because it's a fairly wide roadway there.
You're speaking of the stretch of University between the entrance to the sports park and Lark Avenue?
Correct.
Yes. I'm not confident that we've drawn any conclusions on that yet. I know what we've looked at with regard to the entrance would be an extended left turn pocket, because we do expect a higher volume of vehicle traffic going in there than what you see now. And because of that, there will be some of the current on-street parking will have to be removed. And so, knowing that we've looked at it from that perspective, I know there's going to be a reduction in the available amount of pavement that will be left for the traffic lane. Now, whether or not we can establish that stretch of road as a Class 1 bike lane, or whether we have to go, I'm sorry, not a Class 1, as a real bike lane, or whether we'd have to sign it as a bike route, I could not tell you at this point. That is one of the reasons why we are heavily pursuing the installation of the pedestrian bridge, which we should start calling a pedestrian and bicycle bridge, to link it to the creek trail, because there is more immediate and easy access down just north of Lark. But certainly for the stretch that you refer to, that would be important as well, because we don't want to send, we'd like to get the bicyclists and the pedestrians off of University at that point and bring them over to the creek trail, even if they're not visiting the sports park, because the section of University from that point south is not the most pedestrian, bicycle-friendly road in town.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other comments? Yes, Madam McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. One capital project that I didn't see in the budget that I thought we had talked about at one point was ADA improvements that are recommended as being a high priority for council chambers and the Civic Center as a whole, but council chambers in particular. Can you tell me what the status is on that?
It's not shown as a standalone project, obviously. As I mentioned in the presentation, one of the things that we will be doing during fiscal year 11-12 will be evaluating and designing what we're affectionately calling Civic Center reuse. And in general, we can call that the reuse of the library space, because effectively that's what's triggered the project. But we also know that when we approach that project, we're going to need to address the overall accessibility of perhaps the Civic Center as a whole. There's still some discussion about whether that will apply to every square foot in this entire complex, or just the nearest set of restrooms and the nearest way to get down to the basement level from street level. So yes, you don't see it as a standalone project, but it will certainly be one of the considerations as we go through the reuse exercise. I'm sure that it will be addressed and discussed. I could not tell you with any certainty, though, that we'll be able to do all of the improvements identified during that scoping and design exercise as part of a single project. So we may have to end up with some sort of a prioritization exercise, which will no doubt bring back to council and talk about, if we've only got X dollars to do Y amount of work, we're going to need some policy direction on how we make those decisions.
Okay. If I might ask you to refer to page C33. This is a section on street improvements. First of all, I want to commend Mr. Capurso and the department for the extraordinary number of projects that we're going to be able to accomplish in the next period of time. Given how stretched we are and given the limitations of resources and capacity, I am amazed at the number of items that are on our agenda. On page C33, however, I have a question for you on that list of unfunded projects, starting with Shannon Road between the Boulevard and Cherry Blossom. These are projects that will not be able to be funded within this 2011-2016 timeframe. Is that a correct assumption?
At this point, yes. That's kind of a hedge answer, I understand, but with the resources that we have available, we're not putting these forward for funding. However, one thing that we should probably take note of is that we keep a separate list of unfunded projects, and this list that you see on C33 is not exhaustive. So we have a list of projects. We know what the typical grant funding sources are, and we regularly apply for grants. I think you've seen us bring many of those projects forward before, and we take our opportunities as appropriate. So as you know, we're currently in the midst of a Safe Routes to School project out on Blossom Hill between Cherry Blossom moving east. Things like sidewalk gap improvements are great candidates for that, especially if they're in areas that serve elementary schools, and several, but not all of these are. And so as we move forward through our 5-year CIP, and as you said earlier, you recognize the amount of projects on here. As we can put some projects successfully behind us and create capacity for future projects, we're certainly going to go after grant opportunities as appropriate.
All right.
But at this time, the answer is there's no funding.
All right. I definitely appreciate that. Have we rank ordered in terms of significance or possible impacts? As you mentioned, Safe Routes to Schools. I would assume that there are a couple here that, for example, Shannon Boulevard and Blossom Hill, since it's going down towards Blossom Hill School, right, would be a candidate. And I don't want to go through this specifically, but just to take a look at this, if we do have funding potential outside our own resources, then I assume that that we will try to grab those, and these will be candidates for those sources.
We will, and they will.
Okay. C-56? This is the never-ending project. Keto Road. Now, I know we only started this project with Saratoga in 2001, so we probably have another couple of decades to go here. But is there any possibility of this actually moving forward? And actually, the question I really am curious about is are there temporary fixes that can be made to this by both agencies? Understanding that Saratoga is the lead agency, but is this going to go anywhere, or will this be kind of a perpetual goal for us?
We have good reason to think it will go somewhere this year. We received some contact from the City of Saratoga earlier this year indicating that they wanted to move forward on this project, and we did coordinate with that city as well as the Santa Clara Valley Water District to ensure that the three agencies all have our match money in place, because this is essentially a project that is funded 80% with grant money, but the remaining 20% is a local match, and so we're effectively cost sharing that. This is complicated, not just because it took 9 years, but because there's right-of-way issues, or there's right-of-way and acquisition issues, which we have reason to believe that it's going to move forward, and we have updated the schedule to reflect that. So yes, this may be the longest term project in the CIP, but at this point we are certainly hoping that there will be final design completed during 2012 and actual physical construction going through 2013, 2014. But again, because we're not the lead agency, it's hard for me to tell you that with 100% certainty, but that's what we've been indicated so far.
All right, so these are actual numbers that are being targeted.
Those are actual targets. I'll go that far.
Thank you very much. All right, that's it for my questions. Yes, Councilwoman McNutt.
Thank you. I had two specific questions on two specific projects. So on page C48, the North Side parking lot improvement. And my question on this is regarding timing. Since it's being paid for with private development funds, which I assume are already collected and in the bank.
Correct.
And since we have Safeway opening in August, we have the improvements in Los Gatos Shopping Center, I know the North Side lot is getting a lot more use now and will continue to get more use. So why are we waiting until 2013 to do that?
Essentially, this project will improve the surface of the parking lot. As you can see, I mean, it's a resurfacing, restriping project. And in all honesty, that parking lot, from an infrastructure perspective, is not in very bad shape right now. So it's money that we have. There's no reason, there's nothing failing out there at this point. We had several reasons for recommending this as a year 2 project. One had to do with the fact that there's recently been construction at the Los Gatos Shopping Center, and it seems as though almost when that ended, then Safeway went under construction, and so we didn't think that it would be a wise decision to continue the construction, so that would essentially to appear to be a 3-year construction project. We'd like to get Safeway back open, reevaluate the traffic patterns out there, because there will likely be a change with the reduced access behind Safeway. And then if there are other improvements that we need to do above and beyond the resurfacing, we're already going to be doing some lighting improvements in the meantime. So that's why it's effectively recommended as a year 2, because it's really not an urgent project at this point. It's something that we think we need to do, but given the workload and projects we're keeping in year 1 of the CIP, we think this is important, but not as urgent as the other ones we're taking on.
And then my second is kind of the opposite question, and this is regarding on page E14, the Civic Center reuse project, which in the project timeline has council approving a conceptual design in September of this year. which does not seem to me to give enough time for community input, because it's already almost June. So that's part one, and then part two is to council whether or not this is the kind of thing where council needs to do guiding principles to start with, like we did with the sports park. But that process, as far as I know, hasn't even been talked about, and so September I can't imagine that's happening.
Any comments to that?
I think some of the timelines shown here are probably a little bit on the optimistic side, especially given the fact that we have not selected a design consultant in May of 2011, and that's where we are now. So we'd probably have to readjust that regardless. But our thought was that we didn't want the asset sitting idle for all that long. So I think that all the comments are well understood, and I think that perhaps it would be helpful to get some policy direction from council early on, whether it comes in the form of guiding principles or in a different form. But we have gathered some informal input from the community over the years through a variety of sources, and I know Pamela can, if she wants to chime in, she can. But we've heard for things like there'll be a need for community meeting space. We've also got some offices that are still across the street in the adult recreation center that we need to bring back into the Civic Center complex. So I don't know that any one of those will actually dominate the use, will actually dominate the reuse of the site. And then coupled with that are some of the ADA issues that we talked about earlier that will no doubt have to be addressed in this project as well. So certainly understand that on the scoping side, we could probably use a little more specific direction on that, but I think that we could certainly still get to the overall design phase of this, and perhaps putting some cost estimates and phasing together over the next fiscal year. Whether that means we actually get to construction or not, I couldn't tell you at this point, but that would certainly be the goal.
Well, I think it's very appropriate that we not have a facility that is down for a longer period than necessary. So the idea of a fast track is not a bad thing, and then we can make adjustments. But to keep on, kind of on the mark would be an important thing for me. Yes.
Oh, and I agree. And I already know exactly what I want there, but I guess we have to talk to other people also. So, and I've already had people suggest some really interesting ideas. So I know there's going to be a lot of community interest in this. So I agree it should be fast track, but we do have to acknowledge that we need to involve the community.
Yes.
And I don't think this gives enough time. But also, as it was very helpful in the sports park to have some framework for the discussion, so that the wilder ideas perhaps are outside those parameters, and keep it a focused discussion.
Yes. Understood.
Okay. Any other questions or comments or recommendations for Mr. Capurso? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, that brings us then to public comment, I believe. Any member of the press want to come forward to speak to us?
We've asked each staff member present to turn in a 3-minute card for your
Yes. That will create job security, for sure. All right. Seeing none, then I think we can go to council discussion and eventually some response to those items that are on the first page of our staff report. Council, who would like to start the ball rolling? Yes, Vice Mayor.
First, I'll just thank staff for a very well put together, thorough, and informative set of binders, and also for the responsiveness to questions that came in prior to the council meeting. I can't tell the public how much time it saves in the hearing to have the opportunity to get these well ahead of time, ask the questions, get the answers, and it saves it gives us more information, allows us to be better informed, and gets us through the process efficiently and effectively. So I wanted to thank staff.
Well put. I think that we can probably all agree to that. Any further council discussion? I think it's time for an motion. Yes.
Mayor, do you want separate motions on each of these, or one motion covering everything?
Well,
What's your-
I'd like to ask the attorney if she would for a second. Madam Attorney, we can either move the recommended action, or we can take these one by one. Do you have a preference?
I'll leave it to council discretion, but it's certainly within your purview to move staff recommendations as one motion.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask then for council, before we go to that motion, any council person object or have an issue that they have not as yet surfaced with any of the 5 motions that we are going to take it as one? Okay. I think we're okay then, Councilwoman McNutt.
So I will make a motion to accept the staff's recommendations as itemized on the cover page, page 1 of the staff report, with the exception of adding the designated seats for 55 plus on the new Community Services and Senior Commission.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
The Vice Mayor seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. And with that, yes, the manager wants to say one last word.
Actually, it's just, want to make sure we caught what I captured, it's redundant, as council direction. Civic Center reuse and ADA compliance to report back to council, timeline, community involvement process and guidelines. CIP funding strategies for the future was a second referral. Third was service prioritization as we face the budget challenges of the years ahead. And fourth is something for our 125th anniversary celebration, as well as funding of the Sunday library hours. Those were all incorporated as direction.
Well done. Thank you. All right. I believe with those comments, we are adjourned.